Demonology. By King James I. Introduction. The Demonology of King James, the 6th of Scotland and 1st of England, was written, as the royal author states in his preface, to prove that the assaults of Seconde are most certainly practised, and that the instruments thereof merits most severely to be punished. Such a work has more than a passing interest. It gives the student of history and literature a brief and authoritative guide to the darker beliefs of our ancestors. There is, too, much to interest the theologian and the psychologist, whilst the philologist will find the book a mine of rare and curious phrases. To the modern mind, after 3 centuries of scientific discovery, many of Epismon's arguments will appear somewhat naive, and, it must be confessed, that Philomathes, in his laudable efforts to draw out his companion's erudition, sometimes puts questions which are very inadequately answered. Our greater discernment and weaker faith will scarcely be convinced by the example. Thirdly, said not Samuel to Saul, that disobedience is as the sin of witchcraft? To compare to a thing that were not, it were too absurd. Still, given the implicit belief, the conclusions are not illogical. King James makes many shrewd observations, and the 20th century medium would probably confirm that there are 20 women joined to that craft, where there is one man. The explanation, given on pages 43-4, would not, perhaps, be as readily accepted. The News from Scotland, which is also included in this volume of the Bodley Head Quartos, claims to give a true account of a very notable witch trial wherein King James took a prominent part. The influence of the revelations then made can clearly be seen in the Demonology. Although at first sight the cruelty and barbarity of the whole business is revolting, it must not be put down as solely due to panic and terror. These poor women, when their heads were thrown with a rope according to the custom of that country, were ready to confess anything. But the credulity of the judges was understandable after Ugni's Samson had drawn the king aside and declared to him the very words which passed between the king's majesty and his queen at Vepslo in Norway the first night of their marriage, with their answer each to other. Even a stouter-hearted scholar would have found remarkable confirmation of his worst fears in this alarming revelation. Moreover, in destroying the devil's ministers the king really thought that he was only carrying out his plain duty towards God. Of King James himself one of the most vivid accounts is to be found in a letter of Sir John Harington, describing an audience which he had with the king. Soon upon this, the Prince His Highness did enter, and in much good humour asked, if I was cozen to Lord Harington of Exton? I humbly replied, His Majesty did me some honour in inquiring my kin to one whom he had so late honouried and made a baron, and moreover did adda, we were both branches of the same tree. That he inquired much of learninge, and showed me his own in such sort, as made me remember my examiner at Cambridge aforetime. He sought much to know my advances in philosophy, and uttered profound sentences of Aristotle, and such like writers, which I had never read, and which some are bold enough to say, others do not understand, but this I must pass by. The prince did now praise my reading to him part of a canto in Ariosto, praised my utterance, and said he had been informed of Monnier, as to my learninge, in the time of the queen. He asked me what I thought pure wit was made of, and whom it did best become. Whether a king should not be the best clerk in his own country, and, if this land did not entertain good opinion of his learninge and wisdom. His Majesty did much praise for my opinion touching the power of Satan in matter of witchcraft, and asked me, with much gravity, if I did truly understand, why the devil did work more with ancient women than others. More serious discourse did next ensue, wherein I wanted room to continue, and sometime room to escape, for the Queen was not forgotten, nor Davison neither. His Highness told me her death was visible in Scotland before it did really happen, being, as he said, spoken of in secret by those whose power of sight presented to them a bloody he dancing in the air. He then did remark much on this gift, and said he had sought out of certain books a sure way to attain knowledge of future chances. He named many books, which I did not know, nor by whom written. But advised me not to consult some authors which would lead me to evil consultations. I told his majesty, the power of Satan had, I much feared, damaged my bodily frame. But I had not farther will to cowroot his friendship, for my soul's hurt. We next discoursed somewhat on religion, when at length he said, Now, sir, you have seen my wisdom in some sort, and I have pried into yours. I pray you, do me justice in your repo-root, and in good season, I will not fail to add to your understanding, in such points as I may find you lack amendment. I made courtesy her eat, and withdrew down the passage, and out at the gate, amidst the Monnier varlets and lordly Cervantes who stood around. G. B. Harrison. How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content. Demonology, original title page. Demonology. In for me. Of a dialogue. Divided into 3 books. Edinburgh. Printed by Robert Waldgrauer. Printer to the King's Majesty. And 1597 cum privilegio regio. The Preface to the Reader. The fearful abounding at this time in this country, of these detestable slaws of the duel, the witches or enchanters, hath moved me, bellowed reader, to dispatch in post, this following treatise of mine. Not in any wise, as I protest, to sorrow for a shoe of my learning and engine, but only, mood of conscience, to pre-slash thereby, so far as I can, to resolute the doubting hearts of many. Both that such assaults of Sathon are most certainly practised, and that the instruments thereof, merits most severely to be punished, against the damnable opinions of 2 principally in our age, whereof the one called Scot an Englishman is not ashamed in public print to deny, that there can be such a thing as witchcraft, and so maintains the old error of the Sadducees, in denying of spirits. The other called Vvervs, a German physician, sets out a public apology for all these craftsfolks, whereby, procuring for their impunity, he plainly bewrays himself to ha been one of that profession. And for to make this treatise the more pleasant and facile, I ha put it in for me of a dialogue, which I ha divided into 3 books, the first King of Magi in general, and Necromancy in special. The second of Sorcery and Witchcraft, and the third, contains a discourse of all these kinds of spirits, and spectres that appears in troubles persons, together with a conclusion of the whole work. My intention in this labor, is only to prove 2 things, as I ha already said, the one, that such devilish arts ha bene and are. The other, what exact trial and sure punishment they merit, and therefore reason I, what kind of things are possible to be performed in these arts, and by what natural causes they may be, not that I touch every particular thing of the duel's power. For that were infinite, but one lie, to speak scholastically, since this cannot be spoken in our language, I reason upon genus loing species, and differentia to be comprehended therein. As for example, speaking of the power of magicians, in the 1st book and 6th chapter, I say, that they can suddenly cause be brought unto them all kinds of dainty dishes, by their familiar spirit, since as a thief he delights to steal. And as a spyrite, he can subtly and suddenly enough transport the same. Now vendor this genus, may be comprehended all particulars, depending thereupon, such as the bringing wine out of a wall, as we ha heard of to ha bene practised, and such others. Which particulars, are sufficiently proved by the reasons of the general. And such like in the 2nd book of Witchcraft in special, and 5th chap. I say and pro by diverse arguments, that witches can, by the power of their master, cure or cast on diseases, now by these same reasons, that pros their power by the duel of diseases in general. Is Oswell prod their power in special, as of weakening the nature of some men, to make them venable for women, and making it to abound in others, more than the ordinary course of nature would permit. And such like in all other particular sicknesses. But one thing I will pray thee to observe in all these places, where I reason upon the duel's power, which is the different ends and scopes, that God as the first cause. And the devil as his instrument and second cause shoots at in all these actions of the duel, as God's hangman. For where the duel's intention in them is you are to perish, either the soul or the body, or both of them. That he is so permitted to deal with, God by the contrary, draws you or out of that you'll glory to himself, either by the rack of the wicked in his justice, or / by the trial of the patient, and amendment of the faithful. Being wakened VP with that rod of correction. Howing thus declared to thee then, my full intention in this treatise, thou wilt easily excuse, I doubt not, as well my pretermitting. To declare the whole particular rites and secrets of these lawful arts, as also their infinite and wonderful practices, as being neither of them pertinent to my purpose, the reason whereof is joined in the hinder endy of the first chapter of the third book, and who likes to be curious in these things, he may read, if he will hear of their practices, Bodin's Dæmonologie, collected with greater diligence, than written with judgment. Together with their confessions, that ha been at this time apprehend. If he would know what hath been the opinion of the onsi/ens, concerning their power, he shall see it well described by Hyperivs and Hemingivs, two late Germain writers, besides innumerable other Neoteric theologues. That writes large live upon that subject, and if he would know what are the particular rites, and curiosities of these black arts, which is both necessary and perilous, he will find it in the fourth book of Cornelius Agrippa, and in Vvervs. Humov Spac. And so wishing my pains in this treatise, beloved reader, to be effectual, in arming all them that reads the same, against these above-mentioned errors, and recommending my goodwill to thy friendly acceptation, I bid thee heartily farewell. James R. Demonology, the first book. Demonology. In for me. Of Ein Dialogue. First book. Chapter 1, Argument. Proven by the Scripture, that these lawful arts engineer, have been and may be put in practice. Philomathes and Epistemon reason the matter. Philomathes. I am surely very glad to ha meta with you this day, for I am of opinion, that ye can better resolve me of some thing, whereof I stand in great doubt, nor any other whomwith I could ha meta. AP. In what I can, that ye like to spirit me, I will willingly and freely tell my opinion, and if I pro it not sufficiently, I am heartily content that a better reason carry it away then. Phi. What think ye of these strange news, which now one lie furnishes purpose to all men at their meeting, I mean of these witches? AP. Surely they are wonderful, and I think so clear and plain confessions in that purpose, ha noyer fallen out in any age or country. Phi. No question if they be true, but thereof the doctors doubts. AP. What part of it doubt ye of? Phi. Even of all, for aught I can yet perso, and name lie, that there is such a thing as witchcraft or witches, and I would pray you to resolve me thereof if ye may, for I ho reasoned with sundry in that matter. And yet could never be satisfied therein. AP. I shall with good will do the best I can, but I think it the difficiler, since ye deny the thing itself in general, for as it is said in the logic schools, contra negantem principia non est disputandum. Always for that part, that witchcraft, and witches ha been and are, the former part is clearly proved by the Scriptures, and the last by daily experience and confessions. Phi. I know ye will allege me Saul's Pythoness, but that as appears will not make much for you. AP. Not on lie that place, but divers others, but I marvel why that should not make much for me. Phi. The reasons are these: first ye may consider, that Saul being troubled in spirit, and having fasted long before, as the text testifieth, and being come to a woman that was brute to have such knowledge, and that to inquire so important news. He having so guilty a conscience for his heinous offences, and specially, for that same lawful curiosity, and horrible defection, and then the woman crying out upon the sudden in great admiration. For the vencuth sict that she alleged to ha Senna, discovering him to be the king, thought disguised, and denied by him before, it was no wonder I say, that his senses being thus distracted, he could not perso hear feigning of her voice. He being himself in an other chamber, and seeing nothing. Next, what could be, or was raised? The spirit of Samuel. Profane and against all theology, the Diul in his lichens. As an apparent, that either God would permit him to come in the shape of his saints, for then could noyer the prophets in those days ha been sure. What spirit spake to them in their visions, or then that he could foretell what was to come thereafter. For prophecy proceedeth one lie of God, and the devil hath no knowledge of things to come. AP. Yet if ye will mark the words of the text, ye will find clearly, that Saul saw that apparition, forgiving you that Saul was in an other chamber, at the making of the circles and conjurations. Needful for that purpose, as none of that craft will permit any vethers to behold at that time, yet it is evident by the text, that how soon that once that unclean spirit was fully risen, she called in upon Saul. For it is said in the text, that Saul knew him to be Samuel, which could not ha been by the hearing tell only of an old man within mantle. Since there was many old men dead in Israel nor Samuel, and the common wide of that whole country was mantles. As to the next, that it was not the spirit of Samuel, I grant, in the proving whereof ye need not to insist, since all Christians of whatsoever religion agrees upon that, and none but either mere ignorance, or necromanciers or witches doubts thereof. And that the Diul is permitted at sometimes to put himself in the lichens of the saints, it is plain in the Scriptures, where it is said, that Sathon can transform himself into an angel of light. Neither could that bring any inconvenient with the visions of the prophets, since it is most certain, that God will not permit him so to deceive his own, but only such, as first wilfully deceives themselves, by running to him. Whom God then suffers to fall in their own snares, and justly permittes them to be elude with great efficacy of deceit, because they would not below the truth, as Paul saith. And as to the Diul's foretelling of things to come, it is true that he knows not all things future, but yet that he knows part, the tragical event of this history declares it. Which the wit of woman could never ha forspoken, not that he hath any prescience, which is only proper to God, or yet knows anything by looking vp on God. As in a mirror, as the good angels do, he being for ewer debarred from the horrible presence and countenance of his Creator, but only by one of these two means, either as being worldly wise, and taught by an continual experience. Ever since the creation, judges by likelihood of things to come, according to the like that hath passed before, and the natural causes, in respect of the vicissitude of all things. Worldly, or else by God's employing of him in a turn, and so foreseen thereof, as appears to ha been in this, whereof we find the very like in Micaiah's prophetic discourse to King Achab. But to prove this my first proposition, that there can be such a thing as witchcraft, and witches, there are many places in the Scriptures than this, as I said before. As first in the law of God, it is plainly prohibited, but certain it is, that the law of God speaks nothing in vain, neither doth it lay curses, or enjoin punishments upon shadows, condemning that to be which is not in essence or being as we call it. Secondly, it is plain, where wicked Pharaoh's wise men imitated a number of Moses' miracles, to harden the tyrant's heart thereby. Thirdly, said not Samuel to Saul, that disobedience is as the sin of witchcraft? To compare to a thing that were not, it were too absurd. Fourthly, was not Simon Magus, a man of that craft? And fifthly, what was she that had the spirit of Python? Beside innumerable other places that were irksome to recite. Chapter 2. Argv. What kindy of sin the practisers of these unlawful arts commits. The division of these arts. And what are the means that allures any to practise them? Philomathes. BVT. I think it very strange, that God should permit any mankinda, since they bear his own image, to fall in so gross and filthy a defection. AP. Although man in his creation was made to the image of the Creator, yet through his fall having once lost it, it is but restored again in a part by grace one lie to the elect, so all the rest falling away from God, are given over in the hands of the devil that enemy, to bear his image, and being once so given over, the greatest and the grossest impiety, is the pleasantest, and most delightful to them. But may it not suffice him to ha indirectly the rule, and procure the perdition of so many souls by alluring them to vices, and to the following of their own appetites, suppose he abuse not so many simple souls. In making them directly acknowledge him for their master. AP. No sure lie, for he vises every man, whom of he hath the rule, according to their complexion and knowledge, and so whom he finds most simple, he plainliest discovers himself unto them. For he being the enemy of man's salvation, vises all the means he can to entrap them so far in his snares, as it may be venable to them thereafter, suppose they would, to rid themselves out of the same. Phi. Then this sin is a sin against the Holy Ghost. AP. It is in some, but not in all. Phi. How that? Are not all these that runs directly to the devil in one category? AP. God forbid, for the sin against the Holy Ghost hath two branches, the one a falling back from the whole service of God, and a refusal of all his precepts. The other is the doing of the first with knowledge, knowing that they do wrong against their own conscience, and the testimony of the Holy Spirit, having once had a taste of the sweetness of God's mercies. Now in the first of these two, all sorts of necromancers, enchanters or witches, are comprehended, but in the last, none but such as heirs with this knowledge that I ha spoken of. Phi then it appears that there are more sorts nor one, that are directly professors of his service, and if so be, I pray you tell me how many, and what are they? AP. There are principally two sorts, wherever to all the parties of that unhappy arte are redacted, whereof the one is called magie or necromancy, the other sorcery or witchcraft. Phi. What I pray you? And how many are the means, whereby the devil allures persons in any of these snares? AP. Even by these three passions that are within our cellus, curiosity and great engines, thirst of revenge, for some torts deeply apprehended, or greedy appetite of gear, caused through great poverty. As to the first of these, curiosity, it is one lie the enticement of magicians, or necromanciers, and the other two are the allures of the sorcerers, or witches, for that old and crafty serpent, being a spyrite, he easily spies our affections. And so conforms himself thereto, to diso versus to our rack. Chapter 3 ARGV. The significations and etymologies of the words of magie and necromancy. The difference betwixt necromancy and witchcraft, what are the entresses, and beginnings, that brings any to the knowledge thereof. Philomathes. I would gladly first hear, what thing is it that ye call magie or necromancy? AP. This word magie in the Persian tongue, imports as much as to be ein contemplator or interpreter of divine and heavenly sciences, which being first viewed amongst the Chaldees, through their ignorance of the true divinity, was esteemed and reputed amongst them, as a principal virtue, and therefore, was named justly with an honorable style, which name the Greeks imitated, generally importing all these kinds of unlawful arts. And this word necromancy is a Greek word, compounded of Greek nekron, and Greek mantia, which is to say, the prophecy by the dead. This last name is given, to this black and unlawful science by the figure synodoke, because it is a principal part of that art, to surround themselves with dead carcages in their divinations. Phi. What difference is there betwixt this arte, and witchcraft? AP. Surely, the difference vulgar put betwixt them, is very merry, and in a manner true, for they say, that the witches are servantes one lie, and slaws to the devil. But the necromanciers are his maesters and commanders. Phi. How can that be true, white any men being specially addicted to his service, can be his commanders? AP. Yea, they may be, but it is one lie secundum quid, for it is not by any power that they can haw over him, but ex pacto alanerly, whereby he obliges himself in some trifles to them, that he may on the other part obtain the fruition of their body and soul. Which is the only thing he hunts for. Phi. An very inequitable contract forsooth, but I pray you discourse to me, what is the effect and secrets of that arte? AP. That is over large and field a ye jure me, yet I shall do good will, the most summarily that I can, to run through the principal points thereof. As there are two sorts of folks, that may be entes to this arte, to wit, learned or unlearned, so is there two means, which are the first steerers vp and feeders of their curiosity. Thereby to make them to ju themselves over to the same, which two means, I call the devil's skool, and his rudiments. The learned ha their curiosity wakened veep, and fed by that which I call his skool, this is the astrology judicia. For divers men having attained to a great perfection in learning, and yet remaining overbear, alas, of the spirit of regeneration and fruits thereof, finding all natural things common, oswell to the stupid pedants as to them. They essay to vindicate to them a greater name. By not only knowing the course of things heavenly, but likewise to climb to the knowledge of things to come thereby. Which, at the first face appearing lawful to them, in respect the ground thereof seemeth to proceed of natural causes one lie, they are so allured thereby, that finding their practice to prove true in sundry things, they studi to know the cause thereof, and so mounting from degree to degree, upon the slippery and uncertain scale of curiosity, they are at last enticed, that where lawful arts or sciences fails, to satisfy their restless minds, even to seek to that black and unlawful science of magi. Where, finding at the first, that such joers forms of circles and conjurations rightly joined thereunto, will raise such divers forms of spirits, to resolve them of their doubts, and attributing the doing thereof, to the power inseparably tied, or inherent in the circles, and manier words of God, confused lie wrapped in. They blind lie glory of themselves, as if they had by their quickness of engine, made a conquest of Pluto's dominion, and were become emperors over the Stygian habitacles. Where, in the meantime, miserable wretches, they are become in very deed, bondslaves to their mortal enemy, and their knowledge, for all that they presume thereof, is nothing increased, except in knowing evil. And the horrors of hell for punishment thereof, as Adam's was by the eating of the forbidden tree. Chap. II. Argv. The description of the rudiments and skool, which are the entrances to the arte of magi, and in special the differences betwixt astronomy and astrology, division of astrology in joers parties. Philomathes. BVT. I pray you likewise forget not to tell what are the duel's rudiments. AP. His rudiments, I call first in general, all that which is called vulgarly the virtue of ward, herb, and stone, which is veist by lawful charms, without natural causes. As likewise all kind of practiques, frites, or other like extraordinary actions, which cannot abide the true touche of natural reason. Phi. I would haw you to make that player, by some particular examples. For your proposition is very general. AP. I mean either by such kind of charms as commonly daft yus vices, for healing of forspoken goods, for preserving them from your eyes, by knitting rune trees, or sundriest kind of herbs. To the hair or tails of the goods, by curing the worm, by stemming of blood, by healing of horse crooks, by turning of the riddle, or doing of such like innumerable things by wards, without applying anything, meet to the part offended. As mediciners do. Or else by staying married folks, to ha natural lie do with other, by knitting so many knots upon a point at the time of their mariage, and such like things. Which men vices to practice in their merriness, for from learned men, being naturally curious, and lacking the true knowledge of God, finds these practices to prove true, as sundry of them will do, by the power of the devil for dissowing men. And not by any inherent virtue in these vain wards and frites. And being desirous to win a reputation to themselves in such like turns, they either, if they be of the shamefacter sort, seek to be learned by some that are experimented in that arte, not knowing it to be yule at the first, or else being of the grosser sort, runs directly to the duel for ambition or desire of gain, and plainly contracts with him thereupon. Phi. But methinks these means which ye call the skool and rudiments of the duel, are things lawful, and ha bene approved for such in all times and ages, as in special, this science of astrology, which is one of the special members of the mathematiques. AP. There are two things which the learned ha observed from the beginning, in the science of the heavenly creatures, the planets, stars, and such like, the one is their course and ordinary motions. Which for that cause is called astronomia, which word is a compound of Greek nomos, and Greek astern, that is to say, the law of the stars, and this arte indeed is one of the members of the mathematiques, and not one lawful, but most necessary and commendable. The other is called astrologia, being compounded of Greek astern, and Greek logos, which is to say, the word, and preaching of the stars, which is divided in two parties, the first by knowing thereby the powers of simples, and sicknesses. The course of the seasons and the weather, being ruled by their influence. Which part depending upon the former, although it be not of itself a part of mathematiques, yet it is not lawful, being moderately vist, suppose not so necessary and commendable as the former. The second part is to trust so much to their influences, as thereby to foretell what commonweals shall flourish or decay, what persons shall be fortunate or unfortunate, what side shall win in any battle, what man shall obtain victory at singular combat, what way, and of what age shall men die, what horse shall win at match running. And divers such like incredible things, wherein Cardanus, Cornelius Agrippa, and divers others ha more curious lie than profitably written at large. Of this root last spoken of, springs innumerable branches. Such as the knowledge by the Natiuities, the chiromancy, geomanty, hydromanty, arithmanty, physiognomy, and 1,000 others, which were much practiced, and holden in great reverence by the gentles of old. And this last part of astrology whereof I ha spoken, which is the root of their branches, was called by them pars fortunae. This part now is live lawful to be trusted in, or practised amongst Christians, as leaning to no ground of natural reason, and it is this part which I called before the dual skull. Phi. But yet many of the learned are of the contrary opinion. AP. I grant, yet I could show my reasons to fortify and maintain my opinion, if to enter into this disputation it would not draw me quite off the ground of our discourse. Besides the misspending of the whole day thereupon, one word only I will answer to them, and that in the Scriptures, which must be an infallible ground to all true Christians, that in the prophet Jeremy it is plainly forbidden to believe or hearken to them that prophesies and forespeaks by the course of the planets and stars. Chapter 5, ARGV. How far the sing of charms is lawful or unlawful, the description of the forms of circles and conjurations. And what causeth the magicians themselves to weary thereof. Philomathes. Well, ye ha said far enough in that argument. But how prove ye now that these charms or of natural practiques are lawful, for so, many honest and merry men and women ha publicly practised some of them, that I think if ye would accuse them all of witchcraft, ye would affirm more nor ye will be believed in. AP. I see if you had taken good tent, to the nature of that word, whereby I named it, ye would not ha been in this doubt, nor mistaken me, so far as ye ha done, for although, as none can be scholars in a school, and not be subject to the master thereof, so none can studie and put in practise, for studie the alone, and knowledge, is more perilous nor offensive. And it is the practice only that makes the gradins of the offense. The circles and art of magi, without committing an horrible defection from God, and yet as they that reads and learns their rudiments, are not the more subject to any schoolmaster, if it please not their parentes to put them to the school thereafter. So they who ignorantly prose these practiques, which I call the duels rudiments, knowing them to be baits, casten out by him, for trapping such as God will permit to fall in his hands, this kind of folks I say, no doubt, are to be judged the best of, in respect they vse no invocation nor help of him, by their knowledge at least, in these turns, and so ha neuer entrade themselves in sathon serus. Yet to speak truly for my own part, I speak but for myself, I desire not to make so near writing, for in my opinion our enemy is ouer crafty, and we ouer weak, except the greater grace of God, to essay such hazards. Wherein he preases to trap versus. Phi. Ye ho reason forsooth, for as the common proverb saith, they that sup keel with the duel, ha need of long spoons. But now I pray you go forward in the describing of this arte of magi. AP. For they become once to this perfection in Yule, in howing any knowledge, whether learned or unlearned, of this black art, they then begin to be weary of the raising of their maester, by conjured circles. Being both so difficile and perilous, and so cometh plainly to a contract with him, wherein is specially contained forms and effects. Phi. But I pray you or you go further, discourse me somewhat of their circles and conjurations. And what should be the cause of their wearying thereof, for it should see me that for me should be less fearful yet, than the direct haunting in society, with that foule and clean spyrite. AP. I think ye take me to be a witch myself, or at the least would fain swear yourself prentised to that craft, always as I may, I shall shortly satisfy you, in that kind of conjurations, which are contained in such books. Which I call the duel scool. There are 4 principal parties. The persons of the conjurers, the action of the conjuration, the wards and rites vis to that effect, and the spirits that are conjured. Ye must first remember to lay the ground, that I told you before, which is, that it is no power inherent in the circles, or in the hollands of the names of God blasphemously vist, nor in whatsoever rites or ceremonies at that time vist. That either can raise any infernal spirit, or yet limitate him perforce within or without these circles. For it is he one lie, the father of all lies, who howing first of all prescribed that for me of doing, finding himself to he commanded and restrained thereby, will be loath to passe the bounds of these injunctions. Oswell thereby to make them glory in the empiring ouer him, as I said before. As likewise to make himself so to be trusted in these little things, that he may haw the better commodity thereafter. To deceive them in the end with a trick once for all. I mean the everlasting perdition of their soul and body. Then laying this ground, as I ha said, these conjurations must ha few or mo in number of the persons conjurers, always passing the singular number, according to the quality of the circle, and for me of apparition. 2 principal things cannot well in that errand be wanted, holy water, whereby the duel mocks the papists, and some present of a lewing thing to him. There are likewise certain seasons, days and hours, that they observe in this purpose, these things being all ready, and prepared, circles are made triangular, quadrangular, round, double or single. According to the for me of apparition that they crow. But to speak of the diverse forms of the circles, of the innumerable characters and crosses that are within and without, and out through the same, of the diverse forms of apparitions, that crafty spirit eludes them with. And of all such particulars in that action, I remit it to ouer that ha busied their heeds in describing of the same. As being but curious, and altogether unprofitable. And this fare one lie I touch, that when the conjured spirit appears, which will not be while after many circumstances, long prayers, and much muttering and murmuring of the conjurers. Like a papist priest, dispatching a hunting mass, how soon I say, he appears, if they ha missed one iot of all their rites. Or if any of their feet once slyd the circle through terror of his fearful apparition, he pays himself at that time in his own hand, of that due debt which they ought him. And otherwise would ha delayed longer to ha paid him, I mean he carries them with him body and soul. If this be not now a just cause to make them weary of these forms of conjuration, I low it to you to judge upon. Considering the longsomeness of the labor, the precise keeping of days and hours, as I ha said, the terribleness of apparition, and the present peril that they stand in missing the least circumstance or fright. That they ought to observe, and on the other part, the duel is glad to move them to a plain and square dealing with him as I said before. Chapter 6 Argv. The duel's contract with the magicians, the division thereof in 2 parties, what is the difference betwixt God's miracles and the duels? Philomathes. Indeed there is cause enough, but rather to low him at all, than to run more plain lie to him, if they were wise he dealt with. But go forward now I pray you to these turns, for they become once deacons in this craft. AP. From time that they once plainly begin to contract with him, the effect of their contract consists in two things, in forms and effects, as I began to tell already, were it not ye interrupted me, for although the contract be mutual. I speak first of that part, wherein the dual obliges himself to them, by forms, I mean in what shape or fashion he shall come to them, when they call upon him. And by effects, I understand, in what special sorts of seruses he binds himself to be subject unto them. The quality of these forms and effects, is less or greater, according to the skill and art of the magician. For as to the forms, to some of the baser sort of them he obliges himself to appear at their calling upon him, by such a proper name which he shews unto them, either in likens of a dog, a cat, an ape, or such like other beast. Or else to answer it by a voice on lie. The effects are to answer it to such demands, as concerns curing of diseases, their own particular menagerie, or such other base things as they require of him. But to the most curious sort, in the forms he will oblige himself, to enter in a dead body, and thereout of to judge such answers, of the euant of battles, of matters concerning the estate of commonwealths. And such like other great questions, yea, to some he will be a continual attender, in for me of a page, he will permit himself to be conjured, for the space of so many years, either in a tablet or a ring, or such like thing, which they may easily carry about with them. He gives them power to sell such wares to others, whereof some will be dearer, and some better cheap, according to the lying or true speaking of the spirit that is conjured therein. Not but that in very deed, all devils must be liars. But so they abuse the simplicity of these wretches, that becomes their sholers, that they make them below, that at the fall of Lucifer, some spirits fell in the air, some in the fire, some in the water, some in the land, in which elements they still remain. Whereupon they build, that such as fell in the fire, or in the air, are truer than they, who fell in the water or in the land, which is all but mere trattles, and forged be the author of all deceit. For they fell not be weight, as a solid substance, to stick in any one part, but the principal part of their fall, consisting in quality, by the falling from the grace of God wherein they were created, they continued still thereafter. And shall do while the latter day, in wandering through the world, as God's hangmen, to execute such turns as he employs them in. And when any of them are not occupied in that turn they must to their prison in hell, as it is plain in the miracle that Christ wrought at Genezareth, therein at the latter day to be all enclosed for ewer, and as they deceive their sholers in this, so do they. In imprinting in them the opinion that there are so many princes, dukes, and kings amongst them, one commanding fewer or mo legions, and empiring in divers arts, and quarters of the earth. For though that I will not deny that there be a for me of order amongst the angels in Hoen, and consequently, was amongst them before their fall, yet, either that they brook the same sign, or that God will permit verses to know by damned duels, such heavenly mysteries of his, which he would not reveal to verses neither by scripture or prophets, I think no Christian will once think it. But by the contrary of all such mysteries, as he hath closed VP with his seal of secrecy, it becometh verses to be contented with an humble ignorance, they being things not necessary for our salutation. But to return to the purpose, as these forms, wherein Sathon obliges himself to the greatest of the magicians, are wonderful curious. So are the effects correspondent unto the same, for he will oblige himself to teach them arts and sciences, which he may easily do, being so learned enow as he is, to carry them news from any part of the world, which the agility of a spyrite may easily perform, to reveal to them the secrets of any persons, so being they be once spoken, for the thought none knows but God. Except so far as ye may guess by their countenance, as one who is doubtlessly learned enough in the physiognomy, yea, he will make his sholers to creep in credite with princes, by foretelling them many Greek things. Part true, part false, for if all were false, he would tine credite at all hands, but always doubtsome, as his oracles were. And he will also make them to please princes, by fair banquets and dainty dishes, carried in short space fra the farthest part of the world. For no man doubts but he is a TF, and his agility, as I spake before, makes him to come such speed. Such like, He will guard his shoulders with fair armies of horsemen and footmen in appearance, castles and fortes, which all are but impressions in the air, easily gathered by a spyrite. Drawing so near to that substance himself, as in like manner he will learn the manier jugglery tricks at cartes, dice, and such like, to deceive men's senses thereby, and such innumerable false practiques, which are prowen by manier in this age, as they who are acquainted with that Italian called scoto yet luing, can reperute. And yet are all these things but deluding of the senses, and no ways true in substance, as were the false miracles wrought by King Pharaoh's magicians, for counterfeiting Moises, for that is the difference betwixt God's miracles and the duels. God is a creator, what he makes appear in miracle, it is so in effect. As Moises' rod being casten down, was no doubt turned in a natural serpent, whereas the duel, as God's ape, counterfeiting that by his magicians, made their wands to appear so. One lie to menace outward senses, as kithe in effect by their being devoured by the other. For it is no wonder, that the duel may delude our senses, since we see by common proof, that simple huglars will make 100 things seem both to our eyes and ears other ways than they are. Now as to the magician's part of the contract, it is in a word that thing, which I said before, the duel hunts for in all men. Fie! Surely ye ha said much to me in this arte, if all that ye ha said be as true as wonderful. AP. For the truth in these actions, it will be easily confirmed, to any that pleases to take pain upon the reading of diverse authentic histories, and the inquiring of daily experiences. And as for the truth of their possibility, that they may be, and in what manner, I trust one ha alleged nothing whereunto I ha not joined such probable reasons, as I low to your discretion, to weigh and consider. One word on lie I omitted. Concerning the for me of making of this contract, which is either written with the magician's own bloud, or else being agreed upon, in terms his schoolmaster, touches him in some part. Though peradventure no mark remain, as it doth with all witches. Chapter 7. Argv. The reason why the art of magie is unlawful. What punishment they merit, and who may he accounted guilty of that crime. Philomathes. Sreli ye ha made this arte to appear very monstrous and detestable. But what I pray you shall be said to such as maintains this art to be lawful, for as you ha made it. AP. I say, they sour of the pan themselves, or at least little better, and yet I would be glad to hear their reasons. Fie! There are two principal lie, that you or I heard veast. Beside that which is founded upon the common proverb, that the necromancers commands the duel, which ye ha already refuted, the one is grounded upon a received custom, the other upon an authority, which some thinks infallible. Upon custom, we see that diverse Christian princes and magistrates sure punishers of witches, will not one lie see magicians to Leoa within their dominions, but you and sometimes delight to see them pro some of their practiques. The other reason is, that Moises being brought vp, as it is expressly said in the scriptures, in all the sciences of the Egyptians, whereof no doubt, this was one of the principalest. And he notwithstanding of this arte, pleasing God, as he did, consequently that art professed by so godly a man, could not be lawful. AP. As to the first of your reasons, grounded upon custom, I say, an ill custom can noyer be accepted for a good law, for the are great ignorance of the ward in some princes and magistrates, and the contempt thereof in others. Moves them to sin heavely against their office in that point. As to the other reason, which seems to be of greater weight, if it were formed in a syllogism, it behow to be in manier terms, and full of fallacies, to speak in terms of logic for first, that general proposition. Affirming Moises to be taught in all the sciences of the Egyptians, should conclude that he was taught in magie, I see no necessity. For we must understand that the Spirit of God there, speaking of sciences, understands them that are lawful. For except they be lawful, they are but abusiu called sciences, and are but ignorances indeed, nam homo pictus, non est homo. Secondly, during that he had been taught in it, there is great difference, betwixt knowledge and practicing of a thing, as I said before, for God knoweth all things, being always good, and of our sin and our infirmity proceedeth our ignorance. Third lie, doing that he had both studied and practiced the same, which is more nor monstrous to be believed by any Christian, yet we know well enough, that before that you or the spy right of God began to call Moises, he was fled out of Egypt. Being 40 years of age, for the slaughter of an Egyptian, and in his good father Iethro's land, first called at the fiery bush. Howing remained there other 40 years in exile, so that suppose he had been the wickedest man in the world before, he then became a changed and regenerate man, and very little of old Moises remained in him. Abraham was an idolater in Vr of Chaldea, before he was called, and Paul being called Saul, was a most sharp persecutor of the saints of God, while that name was changed. Phi. What punishment then think ye merites these magicians and necromancers? AP. The like no doubt, that sorcerers and witches merites. And rather so much greater, as their error proceeds of the greater knowledge, and so draws nearer to the sin against the Holy Ghost. And as I say of them, so say I the like of all such as consults, inquires, entertains, and oversees them, which is seen by the miserable endies of many that asks counsel of them, for the duel hath noyer better tidings to tell to any. Then he told it to Saul, neither is it lawful to vse so lawful instruments, were it noyer for so good a purpose, for that axiom in theology is most certain and infallible, nunquam faciendum est malum viti bonum indueniet. Demonology, the Seconde Booke. The Seconde Booke. Of Demonology. Argument. The description of sorcery and witchcraft in special. Chapter 1, ARGV. Proved by the Scripture, that such a thing can be, and the reasons refuted of all such as would call it but an imagination and melancholic humour. Philomathes. Now since ye ha satisfied me now so fully, concerning magi or necromancy I will pray you to do the like in sorcery or witchcraft. AP. That fielde is likewise very large, and alt hot in the mouths. And pennes of Manier, yet few knows the truth thereof, so wel as they below themselves, as I shall so shortly as I can, make you, God willing, as easily to perceive you. Phi. But I pray you before ye go further, let me interrupt you here with a showroot digression, which is, that Manier can scarcely believe that there is such a thing as witchcraft. Whose reasons I will shortly allege to you, that ye may satisfy me as well in that, as ye ha done in the rest. For first, whereas the Scripture seems to prove witchcraft to be, by divers examples, and specially by sundry of the same, which ye ha alleged, it is thought by some, that these places speaks of magicians and necromancers only, and not of witches. As in special, these wise men of Pharaoh's, that counterfeited Moises' miracles, were magicians say they, and not witches, as likewise that Pythoness that Saul consulted with, and so was Simon Magus in the New Testament, as that very style imports. Second lie, where ye would oppone the die pratique, and confession of so Manier, that is thought likewise to be but very melancholic imaginations of simple rowing creatures. Thirdly, if witches had such power of witching of folks to death, as they say they ha, there had been none left aliu long since in the world, but they, at the least, no good or godly person of whatsoever estate could ha escape their duelry. AP. Your three reasons as I take, are grounded the first of them negative upon the Scripture, the second affirmative upon physic, and the third upon the certain proof of experience. As to your first, it is most true indeed, that all these wise men of Pharaoh were magicians of art, as likewise it appears wel that the Pythoness, with whom Saul consulted, was of that same profession, and so was Simon Magus. But ye omitted to speak of the law of God, wherein are all magicians, diweens, enchanters, sorcerers, witches, and whatsoever of that kin that consults with the duel, plainly prohibited, and alike threatened against. And besides that, she who had the spy right of Python, in the Acts, whose spy right was put to silence by the apostle, could be no other thing but a very sorcerer or witch. If ye admit the vulgar distinction, to be in a manner true, whereof I spake in the beginning of our conference. For that spirit whereby she conquest such gain to her master, was not at her raising or commanding, as she pleased to appoint, but spake by her tongue, as well public lie. As privately, whereby she seemed to draw nearer to the sort of demoniacs or possessed, if that conjunction betwixt them, had not been of her own consent, as it appeared by her. Not being tormented therewith, and by her conquesting of such gain to her masters, as I ha already said. As to your second reason grounded upon physic, in attributing their confessions or apprehensions, to a natural melancholic humour, any that pleases physical eye to consider upon the natural humour of melancholy. According to all the physicians, that you are writ thereupon, they solve find that will be ouer short a cloak to cover their nowery with, for as the humour of melancholic in the self is black, hoy and terrine, so are the symptoms thereof. In any persons that are subject thereunto, lians, palines, desire of solitude, and if they come to the highest degree thereof, mere folie and manie, whereas by the contrary, a great number of them that you are ha bene convict or confessors of witchcraft. As may be presently seen by Monier that ha at this time confessed, they are by the contrary, I say, some of them rich and worldly wise, some of them fat or corpulent in their bodies. And most part of them altogether jouen ouer to the pleasures of the flesh, continual haunting of company, and all kind of merrins, both lawful and unlawful, which are things directly contrary to the symptoms of melancholy, whereof I spake. And further experience de lie pros how loath they are to confess without torture, which witnesseth their guiltiness, where by the contrary, the melancholics noyer spares to bewray themselves, by their continual discourses. Feeding Thirde their humour in that which they think no crime. As to your third reason, it scars Eli writes in answer. For if the duel their master were not bridled, as the scriptures teacheth versus, suppose there were no men nor women to be his instruments. He could find ways enough without any help of others to rack all mankind, whereunto he employs his whole study, and goeth about like a roaring lion, as Peter saith, to that effect. But the limites of his power were set down before the foundations of the world were laid, which he hath not power in the least jot to transgress. But beside all this, there is ouer great a certainty to prove that they are, by the daily experience of the harms that they do, both to men, and whatsoever thing men possesses, whom God will permit them to be the instruments. So to trouble or visite, as in my discourse of that arte, ye shall hear clearly prode. Chapter 2 Argv. The etymology and signification of that word of sorcery. The first interest and prenticeship of them that just themselves to that craft. Philomathes. Come on then I pray you, and return where ye left. AP. This word of sorcery is a Latine word, which is taken from casting of the lot, and therefore he that saith it, is called sortiarius a sort. As to the word of witchcraft, it is nothing but a proper name joined in our language. The cause wherefore they were called sorciarage, proceeded of their practice seeming to come of lot or chance, such as the turning of the riddle, the knowing of the formy of prayers, or such like tokens, if a person diseased would leoa or die. And in general, that name was joined them for sing of such charms, and frites, as that craft teacheth them. Monier points of their craft and practice are common betwixt the magicians and them, for they serve both one master, althot in divers fashions. And as I divided the necromancers, into two sorts, learned and unlearned. So must I deny them in other two, riche and of better accompt, poor and of basser degree. These two degrees now of persons, that practices this craft, answers to the passions in them, which, I told you before, the dual vist as means to entice them to his sorus, for such of them as are in great misery and poverty. He allures to follow him, by promising to them great riches, and world-like commodity. Such as though riche, yet burns in a desperate desire of revenge, he allures them by promises, to get their turn satisfied to their heart's contentment. It is to be noted now, that old and crafty enemy of ours, assails none, though touched with any of these two extremities, except he first find an interest ready for him either by the great ignorance of the person he deals with. I end with in your life, or else by their carolines and contempt of God, and finding them in envider despair, for one of these two former causes that I ha spoken of. He prepares the way by feeding them craftily in their humor, and filling them further and further with despair, while he find the time proper to discour himself unto them. At which time, either upon their walking solitary in the fields, or else lying pantsing in their bed. But always without the company of any other, he either by a voice, or in likeness of a man inquires of them, what troubles them, and promiseth them a sudden and certain way of remedy, upon condition on the other part, that they follow his advice, and do such things as he will require of them, their mindies being prepared beforehand, as I ha already spoken, they easily agreed unto that demand of his, and signs sets in other triest, where they may meet again. At which time, before he proceed any further with them, he first persuades them to addict themselves to his cerus, which being easily obtained, he then discours what he is unto them, makes them to renounce their God and baptism direct lie, and jus them his mark upon some secrete place of their body, which remains sore healed, while his next meeting with them, and thereafter you are insensible, how sure it be nipped or pricked by any, as is die lie prode. To ju them a proof thereby, that as in that doing, he could hurt and heal them. So all their ill and well-doing thereafter, must depend upon him. And besides that, the intolerable dolour that they feel in that place, where he hath marked them, serus to waken them, and not to let them rest, while their next meeting again, fearing least otherways they might either forget him, being as new prentices, and not well enough founded yet, in that fiend-like folly, or else remembering of that horrible promise they made him, at their last meeting, they might scunner at the same, and priest to call it back. At their third meeting, he makes a shew to be careful, to perform his promises, either by teaching them ways how to get themselves revenged, if they be of that sort, or else by teaching them lessons, how by most vilde and lawful means they may obtain gain, and world-like commodity, if they be of the other sort. Chapter 3. Argv. The witches' actions divided in two parties. The actions proper to their own persons. Their actions toward others. The for me of their connuentions, and adoring of their master. Philomathes. Ye ha said now enough of their initiating in that order. It rests then that ye discourse upon their practices, for they be past prentices, for I would fain hear what is possible to them to perform in very deed. Although they sorrow a common master with the necromancers, as I ha before said, yet sorrow they him in another for me. For as the means are divers, which allures them to these lawful arts of sorrowing of the duel, so by divers ways vse they their practices, answering to these means, which first the duel, vist as instruments in them, though all tending to one end, to wit, the enlarging of Sathan's tyranny, and crossing of the propagation of the kingdom of Christ, so far as lieth in the possibility either of the one or other sort, or of the duel their master. For where the magicians, as allured by curiosity, in the most part of their practices, seeks principally the satisfying of the same, and to win to themselves a popular honour and estimation. These witches on the other part, being intist ether for the desire of revenge, or of worldly riches, their whole practices are either to hurt men and their goods, or what they possess, for satisfying of their cruel mindies in the former. Or else by the rack in quatsur sort, of any whom God will permit them to ha power off, to satisfy their greedy desire in the last point. AP. In two parties their actions may be divided, the actions of their own persons, and the actions proceeding from them towards any other. And this division being well understood, will easily resolve you, what is possible to them to do. For although all that they confess is no lie upon their part, yet doubtlessly in my opinion, a part of it is not indeed, according as they take it to be, and in this I mean by the actions of their own persons. For as I said before, speaking of magi that the duel alludes the senses of these sholars of his, in many things, so say I the like of these witches. Phi. Then I pray you, first to speak of that part of their own persons, and sign ye may come next to their actions towards others. AP. To the effect that they may perform such seruses of their false master, as he employs them in, the duel as God's ape, counterfeits in his Seruantes this serus and for me of adoration, that God prescribed and made his Seruantes to practice. For as the seruants of God, public lie vises to convene for seruing of him, so makes he them in great numbers to convene, though publicly they dare not, for his serus. As none connuenes to the adoration and worshipping of God, except they be marked with his seal, the sacrament of baptism, so none serus sathon, and connuenes to the adoring of him, that are not marked with that mark, whereof I already spake. As the minister sent by God, teacheth plainly at the time of their public connuentions, how to seru him in spirit and truth, so that from clean spyrite, in his own person teacheth his disciples, at the time of their connuening, how to work all kind of mischief, and crows compt of all their horrible and detestable proceedings past, for advancement of his serus. Yea, that he may the more vilely counterfeit and scorn God, he oft times makes his laws to convene in these very places, which are destinate and ordained for the convening of the servantes of God, I mean by churches, but this fare. Which I ha yet said, I not one lie take it to be true in their opinions, but ewen so to be indeed. For me that he veast in counterfeiting God amongst the Gentiles, makes me so to think, as God spake by his oracles, spake he not so by his? As God had oswell bloudy sacrifices, as others without bloud, had not he the like? As God had churches sanctified to his serus, with altars, priests, sacrifices, ceremonies and prayers, had he not the like polluted to his serus? As God gave responses by vrim and thummim, gave he not his responses by the entrals of beasts, by the singing of fowls, and by their actions in the air? As God by visions, dreams, and ecstasis rewailed what was to come, and what was his will to his scruants, veest he not the like means to forewarn his laws of things to come? Yea, ewen as God lewd cleans, hated vice, and impurity, and appointed punishments therefore, veest he not the like, though false lie I grant, and but in eschewing the less inconvenient, to draw them upon a greater, yet dissimuled he not I say. So far as to appoint his priests to keep their bodies clean and undefiled, before their asking responses of him. And feigned he not God to be a protector of every virtue, and the highest reuanger of the contrary? This reason then moves me. That as he is that same dual, and as crafty now as he was then. So will he not spare a pert ellie in these actions that I ha spoken of, concerning the witches' persons, but further, witches oft times confesses not only his connuening in the church with them, but his occupying of the pulpit, yea. There for me of adoration, to be the kissing of his hinder parties. Which though it see me ridiculous, yet may it likewise be true, seeing we read that in Calicute, he appearing in for me of a goat buck, hath public lie that be an honest homage done to him, by Uri one of the people, so ambitious is he. And greedy of honor, which procured his fall, that he will ewen imitate God in that part, where it is said, that Moises could see but the hinder parties of God. For the brightness of his glory, and yet that speech is spoken but Greek anthropopean. Chap. Argv. What are the ways possible, whereby the witches may transport themselves to places far distant? And what are impossible and mere illusions of Sathon? And the reasons thereof. Philomathes. BVT. By what way say they or think ye it possible that they can come to these lawful coenchos? AP. There is the thing which I esteem their senses to be deluded in, and though they lie not in confessing of it, because they think it to be true, yet not to be so in substance or effect, for they say, that by diurus means they may connuene either to the adoring of their master, or to the putting in practice any serus of his, committed to their charge. One way is natural, which is natural riding, going or sailing, at what hour their master comes and advertises them. And this way may be easily belud, an other way is somewhat more strange, and yet is it possible to be true, which is by being carried by the force of the spyrite which is their conductor, either above the earth or above the sea swift lie. To the place where they are to meet, which I am persuaded to be likeways possible, in respect that as Habakkuk was carried by the angel in that for me, to the Danae where Daniel lie. So think I, the dual will be ready to imitate God, as well in that as in other things, which is much more possible to him to do, being a spyrite, than to a mighty wind, being but a natural meteor. To transport from one place to another a solide body, as is commonly in die seen in practice, but in this violent for me they cannot be carried, but a showroot bounds. Agreeing with the space that they may retain their breath, for if it were longer, their breath could not remain extinguished, their body being carried in such a violent and forcible manner, as be example, if one fall off in small height. His life is but in peril, according to the hard or soft lighting, but if one fall from an high and stay rock, his breath will be forcibly banished from the body, before he can win to the earth, as is oft seen by experience. And in this transporting they say themselves, that they are inusable to any other, except amongst themselves, which may also be possible in my opinion. For if the duel may for me what kind of impressions he pleases in the air, as I ha said before, speaking of magi, why may he not far easilier thicken and obscure so the air, that is next about them by contracting it straight together, that the beams of any other man's eyes, cannot pierce though row the same, to see them? But the third way of their coming to their connuentions, is, that wherein I think them deluded, for some of them saith, that being transformed in the likeness of a little beast or foule, they will come and pierce through whatsoever house or church, though all ordinary passages be closed, by whatsoever open, the air may enter in at. And some saith, that their bodies lying still as in an ecstasy, their spirits will be roused out of their bodies, and carried to such places. And for verifying thereof, will ju it in tokens, as well by witnesses that ha seen their body lying senseless in the meantime, as by naming persons, whom with they meta, and doing tokens what purpose was amongst them. Whom otherways they could not ha known, for this for me of journeying, they affirm to vse most, when they are transported from one country to another. Fie! Surely I long to hear your own opinion of this, for they are like old Wyu's trattles about the fire. The reasons that moves me to think that these are mere illusions, are these. First, for them that are transformed in lichens of beasts or foals, can enter through so narrow passages, although I may easily believe that the dual could by his workmanship upon the air, make them appear to be in such forms. Either to themselves or to others, yet how he can contract a solid body within so little room, I think it is directly contrary to itself, for to be made so little, and yet not diminished, to be so straightly drawn together, and yet feel no pain. I think it is so contrary to the quality of a natural body, and so like to the little transubstantiate God in the Papists' Mass, that I can noyer below it. So to ha a quantity, is so proper to a solid body, that as all philosophers concludes, it cannot be any more without one, than a spyrite can ha one. For when Peter came out of the prison, and the doors all locked, it was not by any contracting of his body in so little room, but by the doing place of the door, though vnsb by the gaolers. And yet is there no comparison, when this is done, betwixt the power of God, and of the duel. As to there for me of ecstasy and spiritual transporting, it is certain the soul's going out of the body, is the only definition of natural death, and who are once dead. God forbid we should think that it should lie in the power of all the duels in hell, to restore them to their life again, although he can put his own spyrite in a dead body, which the necromancers commonly practice, as ye ha hard. For that is the office properly belonging to God. And besides that, the soul once parting from the body, cannot wander any longer in the world, but to the own resting place must it go immediately, abiding the conjunction of the body again, at the latter day. And what Christ or the prophets did miraculous lie in this case, it cannot in no Christian man's opinion be made common with the duel. As for any tokens that they do for proving of this, it is very possible to the duel's craft, to persuade them to these means. For he being a spyrite, may he, not so rawish their thoughts, and dull their senses, that their body lying is dead, he may object to their spirits as it were in a dream, and, as the poets write of Morpheus, represent such forms of persons, of places, and other circumstances, as he pleases to allude them with. Yea, that he may deceive them with the greater efficacy, may he not at that same instant, by fellow angels of his, elude such other persons so in that same fashion, whom with he makes them to believe that they meta. That all their reports and tokens, though sorely examined, may one agree with another. And that whatsoever actions, either in hurting men or beasts, or whatsoever other thing that they falsely imagine, at that time to ha done, may by himself or his marrows, at that same time be done indeed. So as if they would jo for a token of their being ravished at the death of such a person within so short space thereafter, whom they below to ha poisoned, or witched at that instant, might he not at that same hour ha smitten that same person by the permission of God, to the farther deceiving of them, and to mo others to below them? And this is surely the likeliest way, and most according to reason, which my judgment can find out in this, and whatsoever v'ether natural points of their confession. And by these means shall we sail surely, betwixt Charybdis and Scylla, in eschewing the not belowing of them altogether on the one part, lest that draw verses to the error that there is no witches, and on the other part in belowing of it. Make verses to eschew the falling into innumerable absurdities, both monstrously against all theology divine, and philosophy humane. Chapter 5 Argv. Witches' actions towards others. Why there are more women of that craft nor men. What things are possible to them to effectuate by the power of their master. The reasons thereof. What is the surest remedy of the harms done by them? Philomathes. Forsooth your opinion in this, seems to carry most reason with it, and since ye ha ended, then the actions belonging properly to their own persons, say forward now to their actions vist towards others. AP. In their actions vist towards others, three things ought to be considered: first the manner of their consulting thereupon, next their part as instruments, and last their master's part, who puts the same in execution. As to their consultations thereupon, they vse them oftest in the churches, where they convene for adoring, at what time their master inquiring at them what they would be at, Uri one of them propones to him. What wicked turn they would ha done, either for obtaining of riches, or for reuing them upon any whom they ha malice at, who granting their demand, as no doubt willingly he will, since it is to do yul, he teacheth them the means. Whereby they may do the same. As for little trifling turns that women ha ado with, he causeth them to iron dead corpses, and to make powders thereof, mixing such other things thereamongst, as he judges to them. Phi. But before ye go further, permit me I pray you to interrupt you one word, which ye ha put me in memory of, by speaking of women. What can be the cause that there are 20 women joined to that craft, where there is one man? AP. The reason is easy, for as that sex is freelier than man is, so is it easier to be entrapped in these gross snares of the duel, as was ouer well proved to be true, by the serpent's deceiving of Eua at the beginning. Which makes him the homelier with that sex and sign. Phi. Return now where ye left. AP. To some others at these times he teacheth, how to make pictures of wax or clay, that by the roasting thereof, the persons that they bear the name of, may be continually melted or dried away by continual sickness. To some he jus such stones or polders, as will help to cure or cast on diseases, and to some he teacheth kins of vencuth poisons. Which mediciners understands not, for he is far cunninger than man in the knowledge of all the occult proprieties of nature, not that any of these means which he teacheth them, except the poisons which are composed of things natural, can of themselves help anything to these turns. That they are employed in, but one lie being God's ape, as well in that, as in all other things. Even as God by his sacraments which are earthly of themselves works a heavenly effect, though no ways by any cooperation in them, and as Christ by clay and spittle wrought together, opened the eyes of the blind man. Suppose there was no virtue in that which he outwardly applied, so the duel will ha his outward means to be shoes as it were of his doing, which hath no part of cooperation in his turns with him. How fare that you or the ignorance be abused in the contrary. And as to the effects of these two former parties, to wit, the consultations and the outward means, they are so wonderful as I dare not allege any of them, without ironing a sufficient reason of the possibility thereof. For lowing all the small trifles among wives, and to speak of the principal points of their craft. For the common trifles thereof, they can do without conjuring well enough by themselves. These principal points I say are these: they can make men or women to loathe or hate other, which may be very possible to the duel to effectuate. Saying he being a subtle spyrite, knows well enough how to persuade the corrupted affection of them whom God will permit him so to deal with, they can lay the sickness of one upon another. Which likewise is very possible to him, for since by God's permission, he laid sickness upon Iob, why may he not foray easily or lay it upon any other, for as an old practitioner, he knows well enough what humour domines most in any of verses. And as a spyrite he can subtly walk in VP the same, making it peccant, or to abound, as he thinks meet for troubling of verses, when God will so permit him. And for the taking off of it, no doubt he will be glad to rely you such of present pain, as he may think by these means to persuade to be catched in his everlasting snares and fetters. They can bewitch and take the life of men or women, by rosting of the pictures, as I spake of before, which likewise is very possible to their master to perform, for although, as I say before, that instrument of wax ha no virtue in that turn doing, yet may he not very well ewen by that same measure that his conjured slaws melts that wax at the fire, may he not I say at these same times. Subtly as a spyrite so weaken and scatter the spirits of life of the patient, as may make him on one part, for faintness to sweat out the humour of his body, and on the other part, for the not concurrence of these spirits. Which causes his digestion, so debilitate his stomach, that his humour radical continually, sweating out on the one part, and no new good sup being put in the place thereof, for lack of digestion on the other, he at last shall vanish away. Ewen as his picture will dough at the fire. And that gnawish and cunning workman, by troubling him onely at some times, makes a proportion so near betwixt the working of the one and the other, that both shall endy as it were at one time. They can raise storms and tempests in the air, either upon sea or land, though not universally, but in such a particular place and prescribed bounds, as God will permit them so to trouble, which likewise is very easy to be discerned from any other natural tempests that are meteors, in respect of the sudden and violent raising thereof, together with the short enduring of the same. And this is likewise very possible to their master to do, he howing such affinity with the air as being a spyrite, and howing such power of the forming and mowing thereof, as ye ha heard me already declare, for in the scripture, that style of the prince of the air is joined to him. They can make folks to become frantique or maniaque, which likewise is very possible to their master to do, since they are but natural sicknesses, and so he may lay on these kins, as well as any others. They can make spirits either to follow and trouble persons, or haunt certain houses, and affray oftentimes the inhabitants, as hath been known to be done by our witches at this time. And likewise they can make some to be possessed with spirits, and so to become very demoniacs, and this last sort is very possible likewise to the duel their master to do. Since he may easily send his own angels to trouble in what for me he pleases, any whom God will permit him so to vse. Phi. But will God permit these wicked instruments by the power of the duel their master, to trouble by any of these means, any that believes in him? AP. No doubt, for there are three kind of folks whom God will permit so to be tempted or troubled, the wicked for their horrible sins, to punish them in the like measure. The godly that are sleeping in any great sins or infirmities and weakness in faith, to waken them VP the faster by such an vencuth for me, and ewen some of the best, that their patience may be tried before the world, as Iob's was. For why may not God vse any kind of extraordinary punishment, when it pleases him, as well as the ordinary rods of sickness or other adversities? Phi. Who then may he free from these devilish practices? AP. No man ought to presume so far as to promise any impunity to himself, for God hath before all beginnings preordinated us well the particular sorts of plagues as of benefits for every man, which in the own time he ordains them to be visited with, and yet ought we not to be the more afraid for that, of any thing that the duel and his wicked instruments can do against versus. For we lie fight against the duel in 100 other ways, and therefore as a valiant captain, affrays no more being at the combat, nor stays from his purpose for the rummishing shot of a cannon, nor the small clack of a pistoler, suppose he be not certain what may light upon him. Ewen so ought we boldly to go forward in fighting against the duel without any greater terror, for these his rarest weapons, nor for the ordinary whereof we ha daily the proof. Phi. Is it not lawful then by the help of some other witche to cure the disease that is casten on by that craft? AP. No ways lawful, for I gae you the reason thereof in that axiom of theology, which was the last words I spake of magi. Phi. How then may these diseases he lawfully cured? AP. One lie by earnest prayer to God, by amendment of their loos, and by sharp pursuing Uri one, according to his calling of these instruments of Sathon, whose punishment to the death will be a salutary sacrifice for the patient. And this is not only the lawful way, but likewise the most sure, for by the duel's means, can noyer the duel be casten out, as Christ saith. And when such a cure is vist, it may wel serve for a short time, but at the last, it will doubtlessly tend to the viter perdition of the patient, both in body and soul. Chapter 6. ARGV. What sort of folks are least or most subject to receive harm by witchcraft? What power they ha to harm the magistrate, and upon what respects they ha any power in prison, and to what end may or will the duel appear to them therein? Upon what respects the duel appears in sundry shapes to sundry of them at any time. Philomathes. BVT who dare take upon him to punish them, if no man can be sure to be free from their natural innuasions. AP. We ought not the more of that restrain from virtue, that the way whereby we climb thereunto be straight and perilous. But besides that, as there is no kind of persons so subject to receive harm of them, as these that are of infirm and weak faith, which is the best buckler against such innuasions, so ha they so small power ouer none, as ouer such as zealously and earnestly pursues them, without sparing for any worldly respect. Phi. Then they are like the pest, which smites these sickerest, that flies it farthest, and apprehends deepliest the peril thereof. AP. It is e'en so with them, for neither is it able to them to vse any false cure upon a patient, except the patient first below in their power, and so hazard the tinsel of his own soul, nor yet can they ha less power to hurt any. Nor such as contemns most their doings, so being it comes of faith, and not of any vain arrogancy in themselves. Phi. But what is their power against the magistrate? AP. Less or greater, according as he deals with them. For if he be slothful towards them, God is very able to make them instruments to waken and punish his sloth. But if he be the contrary, he according to the highest law of God, an allowable law of all nations, will be diligent in examining and punishing of them. God will not permit their master to trouble or hinder so good a work. Phi. But fra they be once in hands and ferments, ha they any further power in their craft? AP. That is according to the forme of their detention. If they be but apprehended and detained by any private person, upon other private respects, their power no doubt either in escaping, or in doing hurt, is no less nor ewer it was before. But if on the other part, their apprehending and detention be by the lawful magistrate, upon the highest respects of their guiltiness in that craft, their power is then no greater than before that ewer they medled with their master. For where God begins highestly to strike by his lawful lieutenants, it is not in the duel's power to defraud or borrow him of the office, or effect of his powerful and renewing scepter. Phi. But will noyer their master come to visit them, for they be once apprehended and put in ferments? AP. That is according to the estate that these miserable wretches are in, for if they be obstinate in still denying, he will not spare, when he finds time to speak with them, either if he find them in any comfort, to fill them more and more with the vain hope of some manner of relief, or else if he find them in a deep despair, by all means to augment the same, and to persuade them by some extraordinary means to put themselves down. Which very commonly they do. But if they be penitent and confess, God will not permit him to trouble them any more with his presence and allurements. It is not good sing his counsel I see then. But I would earnestly know when he appears to them in prison, what forms vises he then to take. AP. Joers forms, ewen as he vises to do at other times to them. For as I told you, specking of magi, lie appears to that kind of craftsmen ordinarily in and for me, according as they agree upon it amongst themselves, or if they be but prentices. According to the quality of their circles or conjurations, yet to these capped creatures, he appears as he pleases, and as he finds meetest for their humours. For ewen at their public connuentions, he appears to joers of them in joers forms, as we have found by the difference of their confessions in that point, for he deluding them with vain impressions in the air. Makes himself to see me more terrible to the grosser sort, that they might thereby be moved to fear and reverence him the more, and less monstrous and uncouth-like again to the craftier sort. Least otherways they might stir and scunner at his vliness. Fie! How can he then be felt? As they confess they ha done him, if his body be but of air. Ap. I hear little of that amongst their confessions, yet may he make himself palpable, either by assuming any dead body, and sing the ministry thereof, or else by deluding as wel their sense of feeling as seeing. Which is not impossible to him to do, since all our senses, as we are so weak, and ewen by ordinary sicknesses will be oftentimes deluded. Fie! But I would speer one word further yet, concerning his appearing to them in prison, which is this. May any other that chances to be present at that time in the prison, see him as well as they. Ap. Sometimes they will, and sometimes not, as it pleases God. Chapter 7. Argv. Two forms of the duels visible conversing in the earth, with the reasons wherefore the one of them was communist in the time of papistry, and the other sign. Those that denies the power of the duel, denies the power of God, and are guilty of the error of the Sadducees. Philomathes. Hath the duel then power to appear to any other, except to such as are his sworn disciples, especially since oracles, and such like kinds of illusions were taken away and abolished by the coming of Christ? Ap. Although it be true indeed, that the brightness of the gospel at his coming, scaled the clouds of all these gross errors in the gentilism, yet that these abusing spirits, ceases not sign at sometimes to appear. Die experience teaches versus. Indeed this difference is to be marked betwixt the forms of Satan's conversing visibly in the world. For of two different forms thereof, the one of them by the spreading of the euangel, and conquest of the white horse, in the 6th chapter of the Revelation, is much hindred and become rarer therethrough. This is appearing to any Christians, troubling of them outwardly, or possessing of them constrainedly. The other of them is become communer and more vists and sign, I mean by their lawful arts, whereupon our whole purpose hath been a. This we find by experience in this isle to be true. For as we know, mo ghosts and spirits were seen, nor tongue can tell, in the time of blind papistry in these countries, where now by the contrary, a man shall scarcely all his time hear once of such things. And yet were these lawful arts far rarer at that time, and noyer were so much hard of, nor so rife as they are now. Fie! What should be the cause of that? Ap. The diverse nature of our sins procures at the iestis of God, diverse sorts of punishments answering thereunto. And therefore as in the time of papistry, our fathers erring gross lie, and through ignorance, that mist of errors overshadowed the duel to walk the more familiar lie amongst them, and as it were by Barnelli and affraying terrors. To mock and accuse their Barnelli errors. By the contrary, we now being sound of religion, and in our life rebelling to our profession, God iously by that sin of rebellion, as Samuel calleth it, accuseth our life so wilfully fighting against our profession. Fie! Since ye are entreed now to speak of the appearing of spirits, I would be glad to hear your opinion in that matter. For Monnier denies that any such spirits can appear in these days as I ha said. Ap. Doubtlessly who denieth the power of the duel, would likewise deny the power of God, if they could for shame. For since the duel is the very contrary opposite to God, there can be no better way to know God, than by the contrary. As by the one's power, though a creature, to admire the power of the great Creator, by the falsehood of the one to consider the truth of the other, by the injustice of the one, to consider the iestis of the other, and by the cruelty of the one, to consider the mercifulness of the other, and so forth in all the rest of the essence of God, and qualities of the dual. But I fear indeed, there be many saggesses in this world, that denies all kins of spirits, for convicting of whose error, there is cause enough if there were no more, that God should permit at sometimes spirits visibly to kieth. Demonology, the Third Book. The Third Book of Demonology. Argument. The description of all these kins of spirits that troubles men or women. The conclusion of the whole dialogue. Chapter 1, ARGV. The division of spirits in four principal kins. The description of the first kind of them, called spectra and umbrae mortuorum. What is the best way to be free of their trouble? Philomaths. I pray you now then go forward in telling what ye think fabulous, or may be trowed in that case. AP. That kind of the duals connoissing in the earth, may be divided in four different kins, whereby he affrayeth and troubleth the bodies of men, for of the abusing of the soul, I ha spoken already. The first is, where spirits troubles some houses or solitary places, the second, where spirits follows upon certain persons, and at divers hours troubles them, the third. When they enter within them and possess them, the fourth is these kind of spirits that are called vulgarly the fairy. Of the three former kins, ye heard already, how they may artificially be made by witchcraft to trouble folky, now it rests to speak of their natural coming as it were, and not raised by witchcraft. But generally I must forewarn you of one thing before I enter in this purpose, that is, that although in my discoursing of them, I do them in divers kins. Ye must notwithstanding thereof note my phrase of speaking in that, for doubtlessly they are in effect, but all one kind of spirits, who for abusing the more of mankind, takes on these sundry shapes, and vises divers forms of outward actions, as if some were of nature better than other. Now I return to my purpose, as to the first kind of these spirits, that were called by the ancients by divers names, according as their actions were. For if they were spirits that haunted some houses, by appearing in divers and horrible forms, and making great din, they were called lemurs or spectra. If they appeared in likeness of any defunct to some friends of his, they were called umbrae mortuorum, and so innumerable styles they got, according to their actions, as I ha said already. As we see by experience, how many styles they ha given them in our language in the like manner, of the appearing of these spirits, we are certified by the Scriptures, where the prophet Esay 13 and 34. Cap. Threatening the destruction of Babel and Edom, declares, that it shall not only be racked, but shall become so great a solitude, as it shall be the habitacle of Howlets, and of Zim and Im. Which are the proper Hebrew names for these spirits. The cause why they haunt solitary places, it is by reason, that they may affray and brangle the more the faith of such as them alone haunt such places. For our nature is such, as in companies we are not so soon moved to any such kind of fear, as being solitaire, which the dual knowing well enough, he will not therefore assail versus but when we are weak, and besides that, God will not permit him so to dishonor the societies and companies of Christians, as in public times and places to walk visibly amongst them. On the other part, when he troubles certain houses that are dwelt in, it is a sure token either of gross ignorance, or of some gross and slanderous sins amongst the inhabitants thereof, which God by that extraordinary rod punishes. Phi. But by what way or passage can these spirits enter in these houses, seeing they all edge that they will enter, door and window being staked? AP. They will choose the passage for their interests, according to the forme that they are in at that time. For if they ha assumed a dead body, whereinto they lodge themselves, they can easily enough open without din any door or window, and enter in thereat. And if they enter as a spyrite one lie, any place where the air may come in at, is large enough an entry for them, for as I said before, a spyrite can occupy no quantity. Phi. And will God then permit these wicked spirits to trouble the rest of a dead body, before the resurrection thereof? Or if he will so, I think it should be of the reprobate only. AP. What more is the rest troubled of a dead body, when the dual carries it out of the groua to seru his turn for a space, nor when the witches takes it vp and joints it, or when as swine worts veep the growes. The rest of them that the Scripture speaks of, is not meaned by a local remaining continual lie in one place, but by their resting from their travails and miseries of this world. While their latter conjunction again with the soul at that time to reso full glory in both. And that the dual may vse oswell the ministry of the bodies of the faithful in these cases, as of the vn faithful, there is no inconvenient. For his haunting with their bodies after they are dead, can no ways defile them, in respect of the soul's absence. And for any dishonor it can be to them, by what reason can it be greater, than the hanging, heading, or many such shameful deaths, that good men will suffer? For there is nothing in the bodies of the faithful, more worthy of honor, or freer from corruption by nature, nor in these of the unfaithful, while time they be purged and glorified in the latter day. As is lie seen by the vilda diseases and corruptions, that the bodies of the faithful are subject unto, as ye will see clearly prode, when I speak of the possessed and demoniacs. 5. Yet there are sundry that affirms to ha haunted such places, where these spirits are alleged to be, and could neither hear nor see anything. AP. I think well, for that is one lie reserved to the secrete knowledge of God, whom he will permit to see such things, and whom not. 5. But where these spirits haunts and troubles any houses, what is the best way to banish them? AP. By two means may one lie the remede of such things be procured, the one is ardent prayer to God, both of these persons that are troubled with them, and of that church whereof they are. The other is the purging of themselves by amendment of life from such sins. As ha procured that extraordinary plague. 5. And what means then these kins of spirits, when they appear in the shadow of a person new lie dead, or to die, to his friends? AP. When they appear upon that occasion, they are called wraiths in our language. Amongst the Gentiles the dual vist that much, to make them believe that it was some good spyrite that appeared to them then, either to forewarn them of the death of their friend, or else to discover unto them, the will of the defunct, or what was the way of his slaughter, as is written in the Book of the Histories Prodigious. And this way he easily dexied the Gentiles, because they knew not God, and to that same effect is it, that he now appears in that manner to some ignorant Christians. For he dare not so elude any that knoweth that, neither can the spyrite of the defunct return to his friend, or yet an angel vse such forms. 5. And are not our werewolves one sort of these spirits also, that haunts and troubles some houses or dwelling places? AP. There bath indeed been an old opinion of such like things. For by the Greeks they were called, Greek leukonropoi, which signifieth men wolves. But to tell you simply my opinion in this, if any such thing hath been I take it to ha proceeded but of a natural superabundance of melancholy, which as we read, that it hath made some think themselves pitchers, and some horses, and some one kind of beast or other, so suppose I that it hath so vitiate the imagination and memory of some, as per lucida interala, it hath so highly occupied them, that they ha thought themselves very wolves indeed at these times, and so ha counterfeited their actions in going on their hands and feet, priassing to door women and barns, fighting and snatching with all the town dogs, and in sing such like other brutish actions, and so to become beasts by a strong apprehension, as Nebuchadnezzar was so in years. But as to their howling and hiding of their hard and shelly sloughs, I take that to be but iked by an certain report, the author of all lies. Chapter 2. ARGV. The description of the next two kins of spirits, whereof the one follows outward lie, the other possesses inward lie the persons that they trouble. That since all prophecies and visions are now ceased, all spirits that appears in these forms are Yule. Philomaths. Come forward now to the rest of these kins of spirits. AP. As to the next two kins, that is, either these that outward lie troubles and follows some persons, or else inward lie possesses them, I will conjoin them in one. Because as well the causes are alike in the persons that they are permitted to trouble, as also the ways whereby they may be remedied and cured. 5. What kind of persons are they that vises to be so troubled? AP. Two kins in special, either such as being guilty of grievous offences, God punishes by that horrible kind of scourge, or else being persons of the best nature peradventure, that ye shall find in all the country about them. God permittes them to be troubled in that sort, for the trial of their patience, and wakening VP of their zeal, for admonishing of the beholders, not to trust ouer much in themselves, since they are made of no better stuff. And peradventure blotted with no smaller sins, as Christ said, speaking of them upon whom the Tor in Siloam fell. And for doing likewise to the spectators, matter to praise God, that they meriting no better, are yet spared from being corrected in that fearful for me. Phi. These are good reasons for the part of God, which apparently moves him so to permit the duel to trouble such persons. But since the duel hath ewer a contrary respect in all the actions that God employs him in, which is I pray you the end and mark he shoots at in this turn. AP. It is to obtain one of two things thereby, if he may, the one is the tinsel of their life, by inducing them to such perilous places at such time as he either follows or possesses them, which may procure the same, and such like. So far as God will permit him, by tormenting them to weaken their body, and cast them in incurable diseases. The other thing that he preases to obtain by troubling of them, is the tinsel of their soul, by inducing them to mistrust and blaspheme God, either for the intolerableness of their torments, as he essayed to ha done with Iob, or else for his promising to them to loathe the troubling of them, in case they would so do, as is known by experience at this same time by the confession of a young one that was so troubled. Phi. Since ye ha spoken now of both these kins of spirits comprehending them in one, I must now go back again in spearing some questions of Uri one of these kins in special. And first for these that follows certain persons, ye know that there are two sorts of them, one sort that troubles and torments the persons that they haunt with, and other sort that are serusible to them in all kind of their necessaries. And omittes neuer to forewarn them of any sudden peril that they are to be in. And so in this case, I would understand whether both these sorts be but wicked and damned spirits, or if the last sort be rather angels, as should appear by their actions, sent by God to assist such as he specially followers. For it is written in the Scriptures, that God sends legions of angels to guard and watch ouer his elect. AP. I know well enough wherefore that era which ye allege hath proceeded, for it was the ignorant Gentiles that were the fountain thereof. Who for that they knew not God, they forged in their own imaginations, Uri man to be still accompanied with two spirits, whereof they called the one genius bonus, the other genius malus, the Greeks called them Greek endaimona, and Greek kakodaimona, whereof the former they said, persuaded him to all the good he did, the other enticed him to all the ill. But praise be God we that are Christians, and walks not amongst the Cimmerian conjectures of man, knows well enough, that it is the good spyrite of God only, who is the fountain of all goods. That persuades verses to the thinking or doing of any good, and that it is our corrupted flesh and Satan, that interceth verses to the contrary. And yet the duel for confirming in the heeds of ignorant Christians, that era first maintained among the Gentiles, he whiles among the first kind of spirits that I speak of, appeared in time of papistry and blindness. And haunted doers' houses, without doing any ill, but doing as it were necessary turns VP and down the house, and this spirit they called Brownie in our language, who appeared like a rough man, yea, some were so blinded as to below that their house was all the sonsier, as they called it, that such spirits resorted there. Phi. But since the duel's intention in all his actions is ewer to do ill, what ill was there in that for me of doing, since their actions outwardly were good? Epi was it not ill enough to deceive simple ignorance, in making them to take him for an angel of light, and so to account of God's enemy, as of their particular friend, where by the contrary, all we that are Christians ought assuredly to know that since the coming of Christ in the flesh, and establishing of his church by the apostles, all miracles, visions, prophecies, and appearances of angels or good spirits are ceased, which served only for the first sowing of faith, and planting of the church. Where now the church being established, and the white horse whereof I spake before, having made his conquest, the law and prophets are thought sufficient to serve versus, or make versus inexcusable. As Christ saith in his parable of Lazarus and the rich man. Chapter 3. Argv. The description of a particular sort of that kind of following spirits, called incubi and succubi, and what is the reason wherefore these kinds of spirits haunts most the northern and barbarous parties of the world. Philomathes. The next question that I would speer, is likewise concerning this first of these two kinds of spirits that ye ha conjoined, and it is this. Ye know how it is commonly written and reported, that amongst the rest of the sorts of spirits that follows certain persons, there is one more monstrous nor all the rest, in respect as it is alleged. They converse naturally with them whom they trouble and haunts with, and therefore I would know in two things your opinion herein, first if such a thing can be, and next if it be, whether there be a difference of sexes amongst these spirits or not. AP. That abominable kind of the duels abusing of men or women, was called of old, incubi and succubi, according to the difference of the sexes that they conversed with. By two means this great kind of abuse might possibly be performed, the one, when the duel one lie as a spy right, and stealing out the sperm of a dead body, abuses them that way, they not greatly seeing any shape or feeling any thing. But that which he so connuays in that part, as we read of a monastery of nuns which were burnt for their being that way abused. The other mean is when he borrows a dead body and so visibly, and as it seems to them natural lie as a man converses with them. But it is to be noted, that in whatsoever way he saith it, that sperm seems intolerably cold to the person abused. For if he steal out the nature of a quick person, it cannot be so quickly carried, but it will both tine the strength and heat by the way, which it could noyer ha had for lack of agitation. Which in the time of procreation is the procurer and wakener vp of these two natural qualities. And if he occupying the dead body as his lodging expel the same out thereof in the due time, it must likewise be cold by the participation with the qualities of the dead body whereout of it comes. And whereas ye inquire if these spirits be divided in sexes or not, I think the rules of philosophy may easily resolve a man of the contrary, for it is a sure principle of that arte, that nothing can be divided in sexes. Except such living bodies as must ha a natural seed to geneer by. But we know spirits hath no seed proper to themselves, nor yet can they gender one with another. Phi. How is it then that they say sundry monsters ha been gotten by that way? AP. These tales are nothing but a nils fabulae. For that they ha no nature of their own, I ha shewed you already. And that the cold nature of a dead body, can work nothing in generation, it is more nor plain, as being already dead of itself as well as the rest of the body is, wanting the natural heat, and such other natural operation. As is necessary for working that effect, and in case such a thing were possible, which were all utterly against all the rules of nature, it would bred no monster, but only such a natural offspring. As would ha come betwixt that man or woman and that other abused person, in case they both being aliu had had a doe with other. For the duel's part therein, is but the naked carrying or expelling of that substance, and so it could not participate with no quality of the same. Indeed, it is possible to the craft of the duel to make a woman's bell lie to swell after he hath that way abused her, which he may do either by staring vp her own humour, or by herbs, as we see beggars daily do. And when the time of her delirium should come to make her thoil great dolors, like finto that natural course, and then subtly to slip in the midwife's hands, stocks, stones, or some monstrous barn brought from some other place. But this is more reported and jested by others, nor believed by me. Phi. But what is the cause that this kind of abuse is thought to be most common in such wild parties of the world, as Lapland, and Finland, or in our North Isles of Orkney and Shealand? AP. Because where the duel finds greatest ignorance and barbarity, there assailes he grossliest, as I gae you the reason wherefore there was mo witches of women kind nor men. Phi. Can any be so unhappy as to giu their willing consent to the duels vilda abusing them in this for me? AP. Yea, Some of the witches ha confessed, that he hath persuaded them to do their willing consent thereunto, that he may thereby ha them feltreed the seeker in his snares. But as the other compelled sort is to be pitied and prayed for, so is this most high lie to be punished and detested. Fie! It is not the thing which we call the mare, which takes folks sleeping in their beds, a kind of these spirits, whereof ye are speaking. A.P. No, that is but a natural sickness, which the mediciners hath joined that name of incubus to ab incubando, because it being a thick phlegm, falling into our breast upon the heart, while we are sleeping, intercludes so our vital spirits. And takes all power from versus, as Max Versus think that there were some natural burden or spyrite, lying upon versus and holding versus down. Chap. II. ARGV. The description of the demoniacs and possessed. By what reason the papists may ha power to cure them. Philomathes. WEL, I ha told you now all my doubts, and ye ha satisfied me therein, concerning the first of these two kinds of spirits that ye ha conjoined. Now I am to inquire only two things of you concerning the last kind, I mean the demoniacs. The first is, whereby shall these possessed folks be discerned for them that they are troubled with a natural frenzy or manie? The next is, how can it be that they can be remedied by the Papists' Church, whom we counting as heretics? It should appear that one duel should not cast out another, for then would his kingdom be divided in itself, as Christ said. A.P. As to your first question. There are dual symptoms, whereby that holy trouble may be discerned from a natural sickness, and special I3, omitting the dual's vain sickness that the Papists attributes unto it, such as the raging at holy water. Their fleeing aback from the croce, their not abiding the hearing of God named, and innumerable such like vain things that were alike fascious and feckles to recite. But to come to these three symptoms then, whereof I spake, I account the one of them to be the incredible strength of the possessed creature, which will far exceed the strength of 6 of the whitest and woadest of any other men that are not so troubled. The next is the boldening VP so far of the patient's breast and belly, with such an natural stirring and vehement agitation within them, and such an irony hardens of his shinnoes so stiffly bended out, that it were not possible to prick out as it were the skin of any other person so far, so mightily works the duel in all the members and senses of his body, he being locally within the same, suppose of his soul and affections thereof. He ha no more power than of any other man's. The last is, the speaking of sundry languages, which the patient is known by them that were acquaint with him neuer to ha learned, and that with an vencuth and hollow voice, and all the time of his speaking. A greater motion being in his breast than in his mouth. But for this last symptom is accepted such, as are altogether in the time of their possessing bereft of all their senses being possessed with a dumb and blind spyrite, whereof Christ relied one, in the 12 of Matthew. And as to your next demand, it is first to be doubted if the Papists or any not professing the one lie true religion, can relieve any of that trouble. And next, in case they can, upon what respects it is possible to them. As to the former upon 2 reasons, it is grounded, first that it is known so many of them to be counterfeit, which while the clergy innuence for confirming of their rotten religion. The next is, that by experience we find that few, who are possessed indeed, are fully cured by them, but rather the duel is content to release the bodily hurting of them, for a showroot space. Thereby to obtain the perpetual hurt of the souls of so many that by these false miracles may be induced or confirmed in the profession of that erroneous religion, ewen as I told you before that he doth in the false cures. Or casting off of diseases by witches. As to the other part of the argument in case they can, which rather, with reurence of the learned thinking otherways, I am induced to below, by reason of the faithful report that men sound of religion. Ha made according to their sight thereof, I think if so be, I say these may be the respects, whereupon the Papists may ha that power. Christ gave a commission and power to his apostles to cast out devils, which they according thereunto put in execution. The rules he had them observe in that action, was fasting and prayer, and the action itself to be done in his name. This power of theirs proceeded not then of any virtue in them, but only in him who directed them. As was clearly proved by Judas his howing as great power in that commission, as any of the rest. It is easy then to be understand that the casting out of devils, is by the virtue of fasting and prayer, and in calling of the name of God, suppose maniae imperfections be in the person that is the instrument. As Christ himself teacheth versus of the power that false prophets Saul ha to cast out devils. It is no wonder then, these respects of this action being considered, that it may be possible to the papists, though erring in sundry points of religion to accomplish this, if they vse the right for me prescribed by Christ herein. For what the worse is that action that they erra in other things, more than their baptism is the worse that they erra in the other sacrament, and ha iked many vain frights to the baptism itself. Fie. Surely it is no little wonder that God should permit the bodies of any of the faithful to be so dishonored, as to be a dwelling place to that unclean spyrite. AP. There is it which I told right now, would pro and strengthen my argument of the duels entreing in the dead bodies of the faithful. For if he is permitted to enter in their luing bodies, ewen when they are ironed with the soul, how much more will God permit him to enter in their dead carrions, which is no more man, but the filthy and corruptible case of man. For as Christ saith, it is not anything that enters within man that defile him, but only that which proceeds and cometh out of him. Chapter 5, ARGV. The description of the fourth kind of spirits called the fairy, what is possible therein, and what is but illusions. How far this dialogue entreats of all these things, and to what end. Philomathes. Now I pray you come on to that fourth kind of spirits. AP. That fourth kind of spirits, which by the Gentiles was called Diana, and her wandering court, and amongst verses was called the fairy, as I told you, or our good neighbors. Was one of the sorts of illusions that was rifest in the time of papistry, for although it was holden odious to prophesy by the duel, yet whom these kind of spirits carried away, and informed. They were thought to be sonsiest and of best life. To speak of the many vain trattles founded upon that illusion, how there was a king and queen of fairy, of such a illy court and train as they had, how they had attained, and dutia, as it were, of all goods, how they naturally rode and went. Eat and drank, and did all other actions like natural men and women, I think it liker vergls campi elisage, nor anything that ought to be believed by Christians, except in general, that as I spake sundry times before. The duel elude the senses of sundry simple creatures, in making them believe that they saw and heard such things as were nothing so indeed. Fie. But how can it be then, that sundry witches ha gone to death with that confession, that they ha been transported with the fairy to such a hill, which opening, they went in, and there saw a fair queen, who being now lighter, gave them a stone that had sundry virtues, which at sundry times hath been produced in judgment. AP. I say that, ewen as I said before of that imagine a rouishing of the spyrite forth of the body. For may not the duel object to their fantasy, their senses being dulled, and as it were asleep, such hills and houses within them, such glistering courts and trains, and whatsoever such like wherewith he pleaseth to delude them. And in the meantime their bodies being senseless, to connuate in their hand any stone or such like thing, which he makes them to imagine to ha received in such a place. Fie. But what say ye to their foretelling the death of sundry persons, whom they allege to ha seen in these places? That is, a sooth dream, as they say, since they see it walking. AP. I think that either they ha not been sharply enough examined, that gave so blunt a reason for their prophesy, or other ways. I think it likewise as possible that the duel may prophesy to them when he deceives their imaginations in that sort, as well as when he plainly speaks to them at other times, for their prophesying, is but by a kind of vision, as it were. Wherein he commonly counterfeits God among the ethnics, as I told you before. Fie. I would know now whether these kinds of spirits may only appear to witches, or if they may also appear to any other. AP. They may do to both, to the innocent sort, either to affray them, or to see me to be a better sort of folks nor clean spirits are, and to the witches, to be a collar of safety for them, that ignorant magistrates may not punish them for it. As I told you and now. But as the one sort, for being perforce troubled with them ought to be pitied, so ought the other sort, who may be discerned by their taking upon them to prophesy by them, that sort I say, ought as surely to be punished as any other witches, and rather the more, that they go dissemblingly to work. Fie. And what makes the spirits ha so different names from others? A.P. Ewan the Nowery of that same duel. Who as he alludes the necromancers with innumerable feigned names for him and his angels, as in special, making Sathon, Beelzebub, and Lucifer, to be three sundry spirits, where we find the two former. But Joers names Juan to the prince of all the rebelling angels by the scripture. As by Christ, the prince of all the duels is called, Beelzebub in that place, which I alleged against the power of any heretics to cast out duels. By Iohn in the Reulation, the old tempter is called, Sathon the prince of all the Yule angels. And the last, to wit, Lucifer, is but by allegory taken from the day star, so named in Joer's places of the scriptures, because of his excellency, I mean the prince of them, in his creation before his fall. Ewan so I say he disowns the witches, by attributing to himself Joer's names, as if Uri Joer's shape that he transforms himself in, were a Joer's kind of spirit. Fie. But I ha heard many most strange tales of this fairy, nor ye ha yet told me. A.P. As well I do in that, as I did in all the rest of my discourse. For because the ground of this conference of ours, proceeded of your spearing at me at our meeting, if there was such a thing as witches or spirits, and if they had any power, I therefore ha framed my whole discourse. Only to prove that such things are and may be, by such number of examples as I show to be possible by reason, and keeps me from dipping any further in playing the part of a dictionary, to tell what you or I ho read or heart in that purpose. Which both would exceed fate, and rather would see me to teach such lawful arts, nor to disallow and condemn them, as it is the duty of all Christians to do. Chapter 6. Argv. Of the trial and punishment of witches. What sort of accusation ought to be admitted against them? What is the cause of the increasing so far of their number in this age? Philomathes. Then to make an end of our conference, since I see it draws late, what for me of punishment think ye merites these magicians and witches? For I see that ye account them to be all alike guilty. A.P. They ought to be put to death according to the law of God, the sole and imperial law, and municipal law of all Christian nations. Fie. But what kind of death I pray you? A.P. It is commonly veased by fire, but that is an indifferent thing to be veased in Uri country, according to the law or custom thereof. Fie. But ought no sex, age, nor rank to be exempted? A.P. None at all, being so veased by the lawful magistrate, for it is the highest point of idolatry, wherein no exception is admitted by the law of God. Fie. Then bairns may not be spared. A.P. Yea, not a hair the less of my conclusion. For they are not that capable of reason as to practice such things. And for any being in company and not bewailing thereof, their less and ignorant age will no doubt excuse them. Fie. I see ye condemn them all that are of the counsel of such crafts. A.P. No doubt, for as I said, speaking of magi, the consulters, trusters in, ouers, entertainers or stirrers vp of these craftsfolks, are equally guilty with themselves that are the practisers. Fie. Whether may the prince then, or supreme magistrate, spare or ouers any that are guilty of that craft? Upon some great respects known to him. A.P. The prince or magistrate for further trials cause, may continue the punishing of them such a certain space as he thinks convenient, but in the end to spare the life, and not to strike when God bids strike. And so sorely punish in so odious a fault and treason against God, it is not only lawful, but doubtless no less sin in that magistrate, nor it was in Savel's sparing of Agag. And so comparable to the sin of witchcraft itself, as Samvel alleged at that time. Fie. Surely then, I think since this crime ought to be so sorely punished. Judges ought to beware to condemn any, but such as they are sure are guilty, neither should the clattering reporoot of a carling sorrow in so weighty a case. AP. Judges ought indeed to beware whom they condemn, for it is as great a crime, as Solomon saith, to condemn the innocent, as to let the guilty escape free. Neither ought the report of any one infamous person, be admitted for a sufficient proof, which can stand of no law. Phi. And what may a number then of guilty persons' confessions, work against one that is accused? AP. The assize must sorrow for interpreter of our law in that respect. But in my opinion, since in a matter of treason against the prince, Barnes or Wyus, or Neuer so defamed persons, may of our law sorrow for sufficient witnesses and proofs. I think surely that by a far greater reason, such witnesses may be sufficient in matters of high treason against God, for who but witches can be pros, and so witnesses of the doings of witches. Phi. Indeed, I trow they will be loath to put any honest man upon their counsel. But what if they accuse folky to ha been present at their imaginer connuentions in the spy right, when their bodies lies senseless, as ye ha said? AP. I think they are not a hair the less guilty, for the dual durst Neuer ha borrowed their shadow or similitude to that turn, if their consent had not been at it, and the consent in these turns is death of the law. Phi. Then Samvel was a witch, for the dual resembled his shape, and played his person in joint response to Savel. AP. Samvel was dead Oswell before that, and so none could slander him with meddling in that unlawful arte. For the cause why, as I take it, that God will not permit Sathan to vse the shapes or similitudes of any innocent persons at such unlawful times. Is that God will not permit that any innocent persons shall be slandered with that vile defection, for then the duel would find ways anew, to calumniate the best. And this we haw in proof by them that are carried with the fairy, who noyer see the shadows of any in that court, but of them that thereafter are tried to ha bene brethren and sisters of that craft. And this was likewise proved by the confession of a young lasse, troubled with spirits, laid on her by witchcraft. That although she saw the shapes of divers men and women troubling her, and naming the persons whom these shadows represents, yet noyer one of them are found to be innocent, but all clearly tried to be most guilty. And the most part of them confessing the same. And besides that, I think it hath been seldom hard tell of, that any whom persons guilty of that crime accused, as howing known them to be their marrows by eyesight, and not by hearsay, but such as were so accused of witchcraft, could not be clearly tried upon them, were at the least publicly known to be of a very ill life and reputation. So ieless is God I say, of the fame of them that are innocent in such causes. And besides that, there are two other good helps that may be vised for their trial, the one is the finding of their mark, and the trying the insensibles thereof. The other is their fleeting on the water, for as in a secret murder, if the dead carcass be at any time thereafter handled by the murderer, it will gush out of blood, as if the blood were crying to the Hohen for revenge of the murderer. God having appointed that secret supernatural signa, for trial of that secret natural crime. So it appears that God hath appointed, for a supernatural signa of the monstrous impiety of the witches, that the water shall refuse to receive them in her bosom, that ha shaken off them the sacred water of baptism. And wilfully refuse the benefit thereof, no not so much as their eyes are able to shed tears, threaten and torture them as ye please, while first they repent, God not permitting them to dissemble their obstinacy in so horrible a crime, albeit the women kind especially. Be able other ways to shed tears at every light occasion when they will, yea, although it were dissemblingly like the crocodiles. Phi. Well, we ha made this conference to last as long as leisure would permit, and to conclude then, since I am to take my low of you, I pray God to purge this country of these devilish practices, for they were noyer so rife in these parties. As they are now. AP. I pray God that so be too. But the causes are manifest, that makes them to be so rife. For the great wickedness of the people on the one part, procures this horrible defection, whereby God justly punisheth sin, by a greater iniquity. And on the other part, the consummation of the world, and our deliverance drawing near, makes Sathan to rage the more in his instruments, knowing his kingdom to be so near an endy. And so farewell for this time. Finis. News from Scotland, title page. News from Scotland. Declaring the damnable life and death of Dr. Fan, a notable sorcerer. 1591. Note. The original of this text is in the Bodleian Library, Daus F. 210. The text, not the preface, is reproduced line for line and page for page. Pages in the original are not numbered except by signatures. No corrections have been made. G. B. H. News from Scotland, original title page. News from Scotland. Declaring the damnable life and death of Dr. Fan, a notable sorcerer, who was burned at Edenbrough in Ianuary laft. 1591. Which doctor was regefter to the Diule. That fundry times preached at North Berwick Kirk, to a number of notorious witches. With the true examinations of the fade doctor and witches as they vetered them in the prefence of the Scottish king. Diffcowering how they pretended to bewitch and drown his mafety in the sea. Coming from Denmark with Futch. Or her wonderful matters as the like. Hath not been heard of at any time. Publifed according to the Scottish Copy. At London. Printed for William Wright. To the reader. The manifold truths which is spread abroad, concerning the detestable actions and apprehension of those witches whereof this history following truly entreateth, hath caused me to publish the same in print, and the rather for that sundry written copies are lately dispersed thereof, containing, that the said witches were first discoured, by means of a poor pedlar trawling to the town of Trenant. And that by a wonderful manner he was in a moment conveyed at midnight, from Scotland to Bordeaux in France, being places of no small distance between, into a merchant's cellar there, and after being sent from Bordeaux into Scotland by certain Scottish merchants to the King's Majesty. That he discoured those witches and was the cause of their apprehension, with a number of matters miracle/louse and incredible, all which in truth are most false. Northiels to satisfy a number of honest Mindies, who are desirous to be informed of the verity and truth of their confessions, which for certain tie is more stranger than the common repo-root runneth. And yet with more truth I have undertaken to publish this short treatise, which declareth the true discourse of all that hath hapned, and oswell what was pretended be those wicked and detestable witches against the King's Majesty. As also by what means they wrought the same. All which examinations, gentle reader, I ha here truly published, as they were taken and vetered in the presence of the King's Majesty, praying thee to accept it for verity, the same being so true as cannot be reproud. News from Scotland. A true discourse of the apprehension of sundry witches lately taken in Scotland, whereof some are executed, and some are yet imprisoned, with a particular recital of their examinations, taken in the presence of the King's Majesty. God by his omnipotent power, hath at all times and daily doth take such care, and is so vigilant, for the weal and preservation of his own, that thereby he disappointeth the wicked practices and evil intents of all such as by any means whatsoever, seek indirectly to conspire any thing contrary to his holy will, yea and by the same power. He hath lately overthrown and hindered the intentions and wicked dealings of a great number of ungodly creatures, no better than Diules, who suffering themselves to be allured and enticed by the Diule whom they served, and to whom they were preciately sworn, entered into yet detestable art of witchcraft, which they studied and practiced so long time, that in the end they had seduced by their sorcery a number of other to be as bad as themselves, dwelling in the bounds of Lothian, which is a principal shire or part of Scotland, where the King's Majesty saith to make his chiefest residence or abode, and to the end that their detestable wickedness which they priorly had pretended against the King's Majesty, the commonweal of that country, with the nobility and subjects of the same, should come to light, God of his unspeakable goodness did reveal and lay it open in very strange sort, Thirde to make known to the world, that their actions were contrary to the law of God. And the natural affection which we ought generally to bear one to another, the manner of the reuling whereof was as followeth. Within the town of Trenant in the kingdom of Scotland, there dwelleth one Daud Seaton, who being deputy bailiff in the said town, had a maid servant called Gillis Duncaine, who veased secretly to be absent and to lie forth of her maester's house every other night. This Gillis Duncaine took in hand to help all such as were troubled or grued with any kind of sickness or infirmity, and in short space did perform many matters most miraculous. Which things forasmuch as she began to do them upon a so dame, howing noyer doen the like before, made her maester and others to be in great admiration. And wondered thereat, by means whereof the said Daud Seaton had his maid in some great suspicion, that she did not those things by natural and lawful ways, but rather supposed it to be done by some extraordinary and lawful means. Whereupon, her maester began to grow very inquisitio, and examined her which way and by what means she were able to perform matters of so great importance, whereat she gave him no answer, nevertheless. Her maester to the intent that he might the better try and find out the truth of the same, did with the help of others, torment her with the torture of the pillowinks upon her fingers, which is a grievous torture. And binding or wrenching her head with a cord or rope, which is a most cruel torment also, yet would she not confess anything. Whereupon they suspecting that she had been marked by the diawl, as commonly witches are, made diligent search about her, and found the enemy's mark to be in her fore crag or forepart of her throat, which being found, she confessed that all her doings was done by the wicked allurements and enticements of the diawl, and that she did them by witchcraft. After this her confession, she was committed to prison, where she continued for a season, where immediately she accused these persons following to be notorious witches, and caused them forthwith to be apprehended one after another, viz. Agnes Sampson the eldest witch of them all, dwelling in Haddington, Agnes Thompson of Edenbrough, Dr. Fian, alias Ian Cunningham, maester of the Scole at Saltpans in Lothian, of whose life and strange acts you shall hear more largely in the ending of this discourse. These were by the said Gillis Duncaine accused, as also George Mott's wife dwelling in Saltpans, Robert Grierson skipper, and Ionet Bandalandis, with the porter's wife of Seaton, the smith at the brig Hallis with innumerable others in that parties, and dwelling in those bounds aforesaid, of whom some are already executed, the rest remain in prison, to receive the doom of iagement at the King's Majesty's will and pleasure. The said Gillis Duncaine also caused Euphame Meilrian to be apprehended, who conspired and performed the death of her godfather, and who veased her art upon a gentleman being one of the lords and aestices of the session. For bearing goodwill to her daughter, she also caused to be apprehended one Barbara Napier, for bewitching to death Archibald, last Earl of Angus, who languished to death by witchcraft and yet the same was not suspected. But that he died of so strange a disease, as the physician knew not how to cure or remedy the same, but of all other the said witches, these two last before recited, were reputed for as sole honest women as any that dwelled within the city of Edenbrough, before they were apprehended. Many other besides were taken dwelling in Leith, who are detained in prison, until his Majesty's further will and pleasure be known, of whose wicked doings you shall particularly hear, which was as followeth. This aforesaid Agnes Sampson, which was the elder witch, was taken and brought to Haliciate House before the King's Majesty and sundry other of the nobility of Scotland, where she was straitly examined. But all the persuasions which the King's Majesty veased to her with ye rest of his council, might not provoke or induce her to confess anything, but stood stiffly in the denial of all that was laid to her charge, whereupon they caused her to be conveyed away to prison, there to receive such torture as hath been lately provided for witches in that country, and forasmuch as by due examination of witchcraft and witches in Scotland, it hath lately been found that the duel doth generally mark them with a priori mark, by reason the witches ha confessed themselves, that the diawl doth lick them with his tongue in some priori part of their body, before he doth receive them to be his servants, which mark commonly is join them vender the hair in some part of their body, whereby it may not easily be found out or seen, although they be searched, and generally so long as the mark is not seen to those which search them, so long the parties that hath the mark will noyer confess anything. Therefore by special commandment this Agnes Sampson had all her hair showen of, in each part of her body, and her head thrawn with a rope according to the custom of that country, being a pain most grievous. Which she continued almost an hour, during which time she would not confess any thing until the diavol's mark was found upon her priorities, then she immediately confessed whatsoever was demanded of her. And I justifying those persons aforesaid to be notorious witches. Item, the said Agnes Thompson was after brought again before the King's Majesty and his council, and being examined of the meetings and detestable dealings of those witches, she confessed that upon the night of All Hallow Ewen last, she was accompanied Oswell with the persons aforesaid, as also with a great many other witches, to the number of 200, and that all they together went by sea each one in a riddle or sieve, jbh, and went in the same very substantially with flagons of wine making merry and drinking by the way in the same riddles or sieus, to the kirk of North Berwick in Lothian, and that after they had landed, took hands on the land and danced this rail or short dance, singing all with one voice. Comer go ye before, comer go ye. If ye will not go before, comer let me. At which time she confessed, that this Giles Duncan did go before them playing this rail or dance upon a small trump, called a used trump, until they entreed into the kirk of North Berwick. These confessions made the king in a wonderful admiration and sent for ye said Giles Duncan, who upon the like trump did play the said dance before the King's Majesty, who in respect of the strangines of these matters, took great delight to be present at their examinations. Item, the said Agnes Thompson confessed that the diawl being then at North Berwick Kirk attending their coming in the habit or likens of a man, and seeing that they tarried ere long, he at their coming anigh them all to a penance. Which was, that they should kiss his buttocks, in signa of duty to him, which being put ere the pulpit bar, every one did as he had anigh them, and howing made his ungodly exhortations. Wherein he did greatly inveigh against the King of Scotland, he received their oaths for their good and true service towards him, and departed, which done, they returned to sea, and so home again. At which time the witches demanded of the diawl why he did bear such hatred to the king, who answered, by reason the king is the greatest enemy he hath in the world, all which their confessions and depositions are still extant upon record. Item, the said Agnes Sampson confessed before the King's Majesty sundry things which were so miraculous and strange, as that his Majesty said they were all extreme liars, whereat she answered, she would not wish his Majesty to suppose her words to be false, but rather to below them, in that she would discover such matter to him as his Majesty should not any way doubt of. And thereupon taking his Majesty a little aside, she declared unto him the very words which passed between the King's Majesty and his Queen at Vepslo in Norway the first night of their marriage. With their answer each to other, whereat the King's Majesty wondered greatly, and swore by the living God, that he believed that all the diawls in hell could not ha discovered the same, acknowledging her words to be most true. And therefore gave the more credit to the rest which is before declared. Touching this Agnes Thompson, she is the only woman, who by the diawl's persuasion should ha intended and put in execution the King's Majesty's death in this manner. She confessed that she took a black toad, and did hang the same VP by the heels, 3 days, and collected and gathered the venom as it dropped and fell from it in an oyster shell, and kept the same venom close covered, until she should obtain any part or piece of foulé linen cloth, that had appertained to the King's Majesty, as shirt, handkerchief, napkin or any other thing which she practised to obtain by means of one iron curse. Who being attendant in his Majesty's chamber, desired him for old acquaintance between them, to help her to one or a piece of such a cloth as is aforesaid, which thing the said iron curse denied to help her to, saying he could not help her to it. And the said Agnes Thompson by her depositions since her apprehension saith, that if she had obtained any one piece of linen cloth which the king had worn and fouled, she had bewitched him to death, and put him to such extraordinary pains, as if he had been lying upon sharp thorns and endies of needles. Moreover she confessed that at the time when his Majesty was in Denmark, she being accompanied with the parties before specially named, took a cat and christened it, and afterward bound to each part of that cat the chiefest parties of a dead man, and sure all ions of his body, and that in the night following the said cat was canoed into the midst of the sea by all these witches sailing in their riddles or cities as is aforesaid. And so left the said cat right before the town of Leith in Scotland, this Doon, there did arise such a tempest in the sea, as a greater hath not been seen, which tempest was the cause of the perishing of a boat or vessel coming ouer from the town of Brunt Island to the town of Leith, wherein was sundry jewels and rich gifts, which should ha been presented to the now Queen of Scotland, at her Majesty's coming to Leith. Again it is confessed, that the said christened cat was the cause that the King's Majesty's ship at his coming forth of Denmark, had a contrary wind to the rest of his ships, then being in his company, which thing was most strange and true. As the King's Majesty acknowledgeth, for when the rest of the ships had a fair and good wind, then was the wind contrary and altogether against his Majesty, and further the said witche declared, that his Majesty had noyer come safely from the sea, if his faith had not pruled abo their intentions. Moreover the said witches being demanded how the dwell would vse them when he was in their company, they confessed that when the Diawl did receive them for his servants, and that they had vowed themselves to him, then he would carnally vse them, albeit to their little pleasure, in respect of his cold nature, and would do the like at sundry other times. As touching the aforesaid Dr. Fian, alias Ian Cunningham, the examination of his acts since his apprehension, declareth the great subtlety of the Diawl, and therefore mocketh things to appear the more miraculous, for being apprehended by the accusation of the said guileless Duncan aforesaid, who confessed he was their register, and that there was not one man suffered to come to the Diawl's readings but only he, the said doctor was taken and imprisoned, and veased with the accustomed pain, provided for those offences, inflicted upon the rest as is aforesaid. First by throwing of his head with a rope, whereat he would confess nothing. Secondly, he was persuaded by fair means to confess his follies, but that would prule as little. Lastly he was put to the most sore and cruel pain in the world, called the Boades, who after he had received 3 strokes, being inquired if he would confess his damnable acts and wicked life, his tongue would not suffer him to speak. In respect whereof the rest of the witches willed to search his tongue, vendor which was found 2 pins thrust vp into the head, whereupon the vivitches did lay, now is the charm stinted. And shewed that those charmed pins were the cause he could not confess anything, then was he immediately released of the Boades, brought before the king, his confession was taken, and his own hand willingly set thereunto, which contained as followeth. First, that at the general meetings of those witches, he was always present, that he was clerk to all those that were in subjection to the Diawl Cerus, bearing the name of witches. That alway he did take their oaths for their true Cerus to the Diawl, and that he wrought for them such matters as the Diawl still pleased to command him. Item, he confessed that by his witchcraft he did bewitch a gentleman dwelling near to the saltpans, where the said doctor kept skoal, only for being enamoured of a gentlewoman whom he lewd himself, by means of which his sorcery, witchcraft and devilish practices, he caused the said gentleman that once in exeage. Howres he fell into a lunacy and maddens, and so continued one whole hour together, and for the verity of the same, he caused the gentleman to be brought before the King's Majesty, which was upon the exeage day of December last, and being in his Majesty's chamber, suddenly he gae a great scritch and fell into a maddens, sometime bending himself, and sometime capraying so directly vp, that his head did touch the ceiling of the chamber. To the great admiration of his Majesty and others then present, so that all the gentlemen in the chamber were not able to hold him, until they called in more help, who together bound him hand and foot, and suffering the said gentleman to lie still until his fury were past, he within an hour came again to himself, when being demanded of the King's Majesty what he saw or did all that while, answered that he had been in a sound sleep. Item the said doctor did also confess that he had veased means sundry times to obtain his purpose and wicked intent of the same gentlewoman, and seeing himself disappointed of his intention, he determined by all ways he might to obtain the same, trusting by conjuring, witchcraft and sorcery to obtain it in this manner. It happened this gentlewoman being married, had a brother who went to skoal with the said doctor, and calling his shoulder to him, demanded if he did lie with his sister, who answered he did, by means whereof he thought to obtain his purpose. And therefore secretly promised to teach him tout stripes, so he would obtain for him 3 hairs of his sister's priorities. At such time as he should spy best occasion for it, which the youth promised faithfully to perform, and vowed speedily to put it in practice. Taking a piece of coniard paper of his maester to lap them in when he had gotten them, and thereupon the boy practised nightly to obtain his maester's purpose, especially when his sister was asleep. But God who knoweth the secrets of all hearts, and ruleth all wicked and ungodly practices, would not suffer the intents of this devilish doctor to come to that purpose which he supposed it would. And therefore to declare that he was wholly offended with his wicked intent, did so work by the gentlewoman's own means, that in the end the same was discovered and brought to light, for she being one night asleep, and her brother in bed with her, suddenly cried out to her mother, declaring that her brother would not suffer her to sleep, whereupon her mother, having a quick capacity, did vehemently suspect Dr. Fian's intention. By reason she was a witch of herself, and therefore presently arose, and was very inquisitive of the boy to understand his intent, and the better to know ye same, did beat him with sundry stripes, whereby he discovered the truth to her. The mother therefore being well practised in witchcraft, did think it most convenient to meet with the doctor in his own arte, and thereupon took the paper from the boy, wherein he should ha put the same hairs. And went to a young heifer which neither had borne calf nor gone to the bull, and with a pair of shears, clipped off 3 hairs from the udder of the cow, and wrapped them in the same paper, which she again delivered to the boy. Then willing him to do the same to his said maester, which he immediately did. The schoolmaster so soon as he had received them, thinking them indeed to be the maid's hairs, went straight and wrought his arte upon them, but the doctor had no sooner done his intent to them. But presently the heifer or cow whose hairs they were indeed, came to the door of the church wherein the schoolmaster was, into the which the heifer went, and made towards the schoolmaster, leaping and dancing upon him. And following him forth of the church and to what place soever he went, to the great admiration of all the town's men of saltpans, and many other who did behold the same. The reporoot whereof made all men imagine that he did work it by the dwell, without whom it could neither ha been so sufficiently effected, and thereupon. The name of the said Dr. Fien, who was but a very young man, began to grow so common among the people of Scotland, that he was secretly nominated for a notable cunure. All which although in the beginning he denied, and would not confess, yet having felt the pain of the boadies, and the charm stinted, as aforesaid, be confessed all the aforesaid to be most true. Without producing any witnesses to justify the same, and thereupon before the King's Majesty he subscribed the said confessions with his own hand, which for truth remaineth upon record in Scotland. After that the depositions and examinations of the said Dr. Fian alias Cunningham was taken, as already is declared, with his own hand willingly set thereunto, he was by the master of the prison committed to ward, and appointed to a chamber by himself, where forsaking his wicked ways, acknowledging his most ungodly life, shewing that he had too much followed the allurements and enticements of Seconde, and fondly practised his conclusions by conjuring, witchcraft, enchantment, sorcery, and such like, he renounced the duel and all his wicked works, vowed to lead the life of a Christian, and seemed newly connected towards God. The morrow after upon conference had with him, he granted that the duel had appeared unto him in the night before, apparelled all in black, with a white wand in his hand. And that the duel demanded of him if he would continue his faithful service, according to his first oath and promise made to that effect. Whom, as he then said, he utterly renounced to his face, and said unto him in this manner, Avoid Satan, avoid, for I ha listened too much unto thee, and by the same thou hast done me, in respect whereof I utterly forsake thee. To whom the duel answered, That once ere thou die thou shalt be mine. And with that, as he said, the duel brake the white wanda, and immediately vanished forth of his sight. Thus all the day this Dr. Fian continued very solitary, and seemed to ha care of his own soul, and would call upon God, shewing himself penitent for his wicked life, nevertheless the same night he found such means, that he stole the key of the prison door and chamber in the which he was, which in the night he opened and fled away to the salt pans, where he was always resident, and first apprehended. Of whose sodanne departure when the King's Majesty had intelligence, he presently commanded diligent inquiry to be made for his apprehension, and for the better effecting thereof. He sent public proclamations into all parties of his land to the same effect. By means of whose hot and hard pursuit, he was again taken and brought to prison, and then being called before the king's hinds, he was re-examined as well touching his departure, as also touching all that had before happened. But this doctor, notwithstanding that his own confession appeareth remaining in record vendor his own hand writing, and the same thereunto fixed in the presence of the king's majesty in sundry of his council, yet did he truly deny the same. Whereupon the king's majesty perceiving his stubborn wilfulness, conceived and imagined that in the time of his absence he had entered into new conference and league with the duel his master, and that he had been again newly marked. For the which he was narrowly searched, but it could not in any wise be found, yet for more trial of him to make him confess, he was commanded to ha a most strange torment which was done in this manner following. His nails upon all his fingers were rehewn and pulled off with an instrument called in Scottish aticas, which in England we call a pair of pincers, and vendor uri nail there was thrust in 2 needles ewen up to the heads. At all which torments notwithstanding the Dr. Neuer shrunk any whit, neither would he then confess it the sooner for all the tortures inflicted upon him. Then was he with all convenient speed, by commandment, connuate again to the torment of the Boades, wherein he continued a long time, and did abide so many blows in them, that his legs were crushed and beaten together as small as might be. And the bones and flesh so bruised, that the blood and marrow spouted forth in great abundance, whereby they were made unserviceable for ewer. And notwithstanding all these gruous pains and cruel torments he would not confess anything, so deeply had the duel entered into his heart, that he truly denied all that which he had before aught. And would say nothing thereunto but this, that what he had done and said before, was only done and said for fear of pains which he had endured. Upon great consideration therefore taken by the king's majesty in his council, as well for the due execution of justice upon such detestable malefactors, as also for example's sake, to remain a terror to all others hereafter, that shall attempt to deal in the like wicked and ungodly actions, as witchcraft, sorcery, conjuration, and such like, the said Dr. Fian was soon after arraigned, condemned, and adjudged by the law to die. And then to be burned according to the law of that land, prowed in that behalf. Whereupon he was put into a cart, and being first strangled, he was immediately put into a great fire, being ready prowed for that purpose, and there burned in the Castle Hill of Edinburgh on a Saturday in the end of January last past. 1591. The rest of the witches which are not yet executed, remain in prison till farther trial, and knowledge of his Majesty's pleasure. This strange discourse before recited, may perhaps show some occasion of doubt to such as shall happen to read the same, and thereby conjecture that the King's Majesty would not hazard himself in the presence of such notorious witches. Lest Thirde might ha ensued great danger to his person and the general state of the land, which thing in truth might wel ha been feared. But to answer generally to such, let this suffice, that first it is well known that the king is the child and servant of God, and they but servants to the duel, he is the Lord's anointed. And they but vessels of God's wrath, he is a true Christian, and trusteth in God, they worse than infidels, for they only trust in the duel, who daily sorrow them, till he ha brought them to veter destruction. But hereby it seemeth that his highness carried a magnanimous and contented mind, not feared with their enchantments, but resolute in this, that so long as God is with him, he feareth not who is against him. And truly the whole scope of this treatise doth so plainly lie open the wonderful prowess of the Almighty, that if he had not been defended by his omnipotency and power, his hinds had never returned alieu in his voyage fro Denmark. So that there is no doubt but God would as well defend him on the land as on the sea, where they pretended their damnable practice. Finis.